You know what old Jack Burton always says at a time like this?
Come on, then. I'll bite your legs off!
I can take it.
Great power comes great responsibility.
We have a hope.
Get to the chopper! Hanley! To the flesh wound. I am the father.
And welcome back to the 47th episode of the Monster Movie Stompdown. Of course, you got Sludge here, my co-host to the right of me, left of me.
Is Mark.
My brother in Texas.
Ruben.
And then we have a very special guest that we have promoted on this episode. None other than the one and only August Ragone. August, say hello.
Hey, how's it going, everybody? Thanks for inviting me to the show.
Man, super excited about you being here. I mean, we've talked about you amongst the three of us and you in the past. You know, like remember I think it actually may have been not this year, but I think it was last year on Godzilla's birthday. Me and you had somehow gotten into a discussion on Facebook, and I think we'd started messaging each other on Messenger, and I was flipping out. I was like, I told Ruben and Mark both, I'm like, dude, I'm talking to August Ragone. Like, you know, this is like, if you're a science kid, you're talking to Bill Nye the Science Guy or something, you know, I'm like, this is so cool. And told him made my day. And then this year for Godzilla's birthday, because August, in case you don't know, I'm 35 years old, and I have never worked a November 3rd a day in my life. I have taken that day off every year since I started working at the age of 15 and just do Godzilla movies and video games and check out my collection and just nerd out all the way. And so this year for his birthday.
Yeah, this year was Sludge needs off for election day. It's November the 3rd. And I'm like, nope, he needs off. It's Godzilla's birthday.
Exactly. People at work were like, really? I'm like, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And so for this year, it was cool because, I mean, I not only did I, of course, get to talk to August again this year, but I got to talk briefly with Matt Frank. And so this Godzilla birthday was like the greatest of all time for me. I'm like, dude, like I've got the monster movie guru and then the greatest monster movie artist, you know, talking to me at one time. And just through discussion, because I think you were talking to somebody about an Ultraman video or movie, and you had tagged, because my first name's Tristan, another guy in the same group that we're in whose name happened to be Tristan. And you messaged me about it, and that's when we started talking. And I just brought up, you know, the show and you seeing if you'd come on, and you were so gracious to be like, absolutely, man. And that just floored me. And I was like, what? Really? Like, this is awesome. I had some friends. Really, I'm sorry.
No, I'm just saying, sorry.
I even had some friends who were like, dude, how did you get August to come on? I'm like, I just asked. I didn't think it'd be that easy, you know?
You know, it's like, it was kind of funny because there's a lot of different podcasts on this subject. Mm-hmm. In general are focused on Godzilla and kaiju. And, you know, sometimes I go, man, why doesn't anybody invite me? You know, it's like, you know, and then I hear that people are going like, I never thought he would accept if we asked him. So we just never asked. Like, just ask. Everybody just ask. I'll do whatever I will do a tire store opening.
Well,
invite me.
So glad that you accepted the invitation, and we got a really cool episode for today. But before we get started, August, kind of give us I mean, obviously, you know, I know a bit about you as far as your history in this genre, and not just a kaiju genre, but the tokusatsu genre in general. But kind of give us a rundown of things that you've done, or what really got you into this. You know, what made August Ragone August Ragone?
Well, you know, most people, you know, mostly boys, you know, when you're, you know, like 3 or 4 years old, if you happen to come across dinosaurs or in any way, shape, or form, whether it's in school or in movies or whatever, you become kind of fascinated with that. And then that kind of extends to, you know, the Godzilla type monsters and kaiju and all that. So, you know, that's sort of the basic, the boring, basic foundation. And then, you know, you just start, either some people watch it casually until, you know, they discover other things when they get older.
Or girls,
Uh,
or
yeah.
cars.
Whatever it happens to be, and then they grow out of it, and I just kept into it. What happened to me is I got fascinated more with because there's a lot of fans that you can look at today. I mean, everybody develops sort of the same way. You could look at fans today, younger fans, and see that that they become obsessed with the world within the world, and will argue about monsters' powers and who has the greater strength, and which monster's tail is more powerful, stuff like that. And I wasn't so much interested in that. I was kind of interested in data, like that peripheral data, like Godzilla is 50 meters tall and weighs 20,000 tons, metric tons. But I was more fascinated by who are the people who make this stuff. I want to know more about how this stuff was made, who came up with this stuff. And I think the first time was when I was, I don't know, maybe I was like 8 or 9 or 10 years old. I'm going to have to pinpoint that one day. But I got the Sunday paper, and the Sunday paper would have, again, like a TV guide would have like the TV log.
Yep.
And there was a listing, because I go through and look for the monster movies that were coming up this week. And then there was Attack of the Mushroom People,
Great
Japanese, 1963. And I went, ooh, another Japanese monster film. I have to see this. And then it said, it says a little thing like castaways get lost on a desert island, blah, blah, blah. But then it has a couple of the actors' names, usually misspelled. And then it said special effects by A.G. Tsuburaya. And I went, who is that? Wait, that is the person who made the special effects. That kind of opened up that door. That was a name drop that I became focused on. And then there was Famous Monsters magazine around that time when I was a kid. And they had reprinted an article from the 60s, because, Famous Monsters started in the late 50s.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is like the early 70s. And I think it was issue 1. No, I can't. I'm not going to even guess what issue it is right now. But it was before one. It was like in the 110s. So it's like issue 110 to 11 or 12. And they reprinted this article about A.G. Tsuburaya, the guy who did all the special effects for the Godzilla films. And I just read that article over and over and over again. And it had these great behind the scenes photos from the Mysterians and King Kong versus Godzilla and Mothra primarily. They did a big splash page with one of the images. And I just kept reading. That article was only like 4 or 5 pages long, or something like that. And I just kept rereading and just staring at those photos, over and over again. And I became mostly fascinated with that. There was a fanzine, I don't know. Does anybody still remember what a fanzine is out there?
Yeah, the independent magazines that were printed by fans, usually
right,
stock paper. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. And you used to do, you used to go to the copy store and go to CopyMat or whatever and get copies made, or someone will go even far back as mimeograph machines where you had to hand crank them. But fans would put together their own magazines to exchange information. There was one in the States published out of Toledo, Ohio, called the Japanese Fantasy Film Journal, which that's my mentor, American mentor, is Craig Shoemaker, the publisher of that zine. He was interested also in how these films were made and who were the people that were behind the scenes. He started that in 1968. So I found that zine too, and that kind of pushed me in that direction. And then I would write my local horror host and go get these movies. And these are the movies you should be showing on Creature Features type of a thing. And then he made a personal appearance in 1976 at a theater. And I just handed him this package because he goes, if anybody comes across any information on new movies coming out, especially Godzilla movies, because Godzilla movies were really popular in the early 70s here in the States, then forward that to the station. So I put together this whole manila envelope full of magazine clippings and stuff I had handwritten out, information I compiled, and I handed it to him. And I said, I just gave it to him. It was crazy. It was crazy. There were like 400 kids. There were 400 kids wanting to shake his hand. And I just went, here, there's some information on new Godzilla movies coming. And a few weeks later, it's not that same story. And I've told this before where, the kid has the hero and the hero lets him down. And then there's the redemption later. I didn't have that. I didn't hear from him for weeks and weeks. And I didn't expect him to contact me right away. And my thinking in my head was, he's a busy man. That man's on TV. So I was kind of a little grounded for what I was into. But one day I came home from school a few months later, after I gave him the package, maybe 3 months later down the road. And my mom says, you have a call from Bob Wilkins, who was the host of Creature Features. And after I was done doing, flip-flops and doing back springs off the wall, I called him and he said, hey, I got your package, because I also wrote in the package, send this all back when you're finished with it, please,
This is my stuff.
And I included my phone number and my address in case he wanted more information. Now, this show was hugely rated. Bob Wilkins was like a hero to a lot of television viewers in the San Francisco Bay Area, and he usually had an audience of about 1 million people tuning into his show every Saturday night. So he was a big, 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 big deal, and created another monster explosion because, we had monster movies in theaters and horror films, and we had Creature Features on TV, and other stations had been running monster movies and talking with a lot of other monster kids around the country who grew up in that period. They always had we had Creature Double Feature, or we had, this show, or we had that show. And that was like the one show that maybe had monster movies every week, or maybe there was a Saturday afternoon show too. But I look back and realized that we had an incredible amount of monsters and opportunities to see monster movies and horror films in the San Francisco Bay Area. It was insane. There would be theaters in town. San Francisco is only 7 by 7 miles, surrounded 3 sides by water, right? And we had more movie theaters in this town than any other place I knew that small. I had 4 movie theaters in my neighborhood, and I grew up in a residential neighborhood, not a downtown area. But it wasn't far from our shopping area, which was at the time when I was a little kid, more so than before I came around. It was San Francisco's Miracle Mile shopping district. But we had, on one block, we'd had 2 movie theaters that were like 400 feet away from each other, and then another one across the street. And so that was just on one block.
Wow.
So we had all these movie theaters, we had all this stuff going on, and Bob Wilkins became the king of this. So Bob Wilkins, I get up the gumption to call Bob Wilkins, and he goes, "I got your package. Thank you very much. You certainly know a lot about Godzilla. Just want to let you know that a new Godzilla movie is going to be opening up in a few weeks in theaters called Godzilla versus Megalon. Would you like to come on the show and talk about Godzilla?"
Oh, wow.
So I said yes, and I went on the show, and I was scared. I was so scared. I was shaking. I had the whole time I had the nervous knee, the nervous leg, the bouncy leg.
Oh yeah.
But we did the show. Because we had a Japantown in San Francisco, I had a lot of stuff to bring on the show to visually show, not just like everybody else had the same copy of Famous Monsters of Filmland or something like that.
Right.
And I had some of the Japanese Godzilla toys, and I brought those on the show. And we did this great interview, and I'm just a kid, but I did good enough that he invited me back, and then I became a regular on his show, and then he did a semi-regular, and then I did he started doing a kids show called Captain Cosmic that was Monday through Friday in the afternoon. And the whole reason he wanted to do that was to show things like Ultraman and Spectreman and the Space Giants, all these Japanese superhero shows and monster shows. And that's when he really started leaning on me. Like I recommended shows for him to buy. He's like, what else is out there? What else is out there, man? You're the expert. Tell me, and I wrote a list of stuff for him, and he got most of those shows. I mean, and he really thanked me because one of the shows I recommended, I just wrote this list because I was such a weirdo kid that I would pick up issues of Variety magazine, right? And why is this, teenager, this pre-adolescent, this adolescent preteen, why is he buying Variety? Why is he going to the newsstand? What is he like some genius filmmaker kid or what? It was just like looking for the ads with the Japanese monsters because they would cover the whole, international film business. So companies like Toho or Subaraya Productions, who produces the Ultraman shows, would run full page ads in Variety. So it was another way I might see some graphic that, oh man, I gotta buy this issue for this full page ad, and they would go, there was also information on stuff that was coming out, and Japanese, the Japanese film scene was also covered in Variety. And so I don't know what the whole point of me bringing up Variety was about now.
Having access to fresh information.
Oh, right. So, you had all this stuff in there, and so I drew from a lot of different places, but, so Bob Wilkins was like, so there'd be ads for like what shows are available, who were the companies that had the shows. And I was also the nerdy kid that when I grew up watching shows like Ultraman or whatever, I would pay attention to the credits. Like I wouldn't just turn it off or run out to go play ball. I would wait till the credits were over or whatever. And I went, okay, Johnny Sokko and his Flying Robot was released by American International Television, okay? And I would make mental notes of all this stuff. So, I would write this list. I wrote this list for Bob Wilkins that said, like, Ultraman is available through United Artists Television. Johnny Sokko and his Flying Robot is available through American International Television. And then later, Bob thanked me about Johnny Sokko. Because back then, the standard, if you were going to do a contract for a syndicated show, like let's say you wanted Star Trek on your channel or Ultraman, it was generally a standard 5-year contract, right? So you could have the rights to show this TV show for 5 years. And then, you'd have to send it back or renew your contract. So Bob Wilkins was always looking for, because he had contacted some Japanese companies, and he was looking for shows that would work within the budget of his show, which wasn't necessarily a low budget show, but I mean, some of these Japanese companies were going, yeah, we have that show. We can give it to you for $10,000 an episode. Like Ultra 7. He contacted Subaraya Productions to get Ultra 7. That's the show that followed the original Ultraman. Mm-hmm. And they're saying, we want $10,000 an episode. And he went, nobody can afford that. Nobody, and that was an insanely high price in, the United States at the time for any kind of second run show. It's a show from the 60s, But anyway, so he gets Johnny Sokko and his Flying Robot, and he took me aside one day at the station, and he goes, hey, I just want to let you know that I want to thank you. Thank you so much for Johnny Sokko and his Flying Robot. I got a 5-year option on it for $2,500.
Oh, wow.
Which was, there was 26 episodes of that show. So he only had to pay $100 for each episode, basically. $3. Let's do the division. But he only had to pay that for 5 years. He got that show for nothing. That was dirt cheap in those days. Yeah. So, that's, I got my start working with him, going on TV, gave me confidence to talk about this stuff in front of people. And Bob really kind of tried to promote me as this expert, and he was the first person to call me an expert on the air with a little, your name superimposed when you're on TV. Oh. They do the chroma key. I forgot what they call it now. They give you the little plug of who you are and what you are. Mm-hmm. And so that kind of got me started on that. And I started writing for fanzines, and moved to Japan, met a lot of people I wanted who made these films. Not everybody, obviously, but I was kind of again, kind of like I'm afraid to bug all these people, but I made connections and met people through those connections, and started learning more and more and more about how these movies and TV shows were made, and teaching myself Japanese so I'm buying all these Japanese books. I might as well know what they say, and getting information that way. And thanks for inviting me to the show. I've taken up all the time telling the story of myself.
Yeah.
Myself.
That was going to be one of my questions on how you got started. I was like, okay,
that was
that's
awesome about
get started on this. That's an awesome story.
Yeah, thanks. So
and it's very relatable because, I mean, your story, except for the part going on TV and everything, it's the same. It's like we had no access to that stuff back then. You had to dig around. My son always asked me, "How do you find out about this?" I said, "Reading magazines." That was the way we found out back then.
Oh yeah, because, even before magazines like G-Fan came out. Yeah, it's like I did a magazine called Markalite, and that could be a whole episode unto itself if anybody would ever be interested in hearing the whole story of how that magazine came about. But we did not a fanzine, we did an actual magazine, and it ran 3 issues and disappeared, and through no fault of our own, man, we had great sales. We were getting letters from servicemen in Saudi Arabia,
very cool.
Going like, "We love your magazine," so we were distributed worldwide in the early 90s. And then our publisher ran off with all the money.
Oh,
basically what happened.
That sounds like a typical story.
Yeah, so a lot of intrigue and stuff like that. So we would have kept doing that magazine a lot longer, and it probably would have been a rival, because G-Fan, I think, popped up. Everybody's familiar with G-Fan out there?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So for the people at home who might not know, G-Fan is a magazine that's out of Canada that's all about Godzilla. The first started out as sort of a newsletter and developed quickly into a little mini magazine, and it's been running since about 94, I think. It came out 93 or 94, the first 93, I think.
93,
the first issue. Yeah, because they did coverage of Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla 2 or Super Mechagodzilla or whatever they're calling it this week. The 1993 Godzilla movie.
Constantly changed his name. That was one of my first accesses to as far as literature, because I mean, much like you with Bob Wilkins, my first experience with Godzilla through my father. What was it, Sammy Terry?
Well, yeah, I think it was. It was a Sammy Terry. That or the just the local independent station up there in Indiana, the Saturday matinee movie at 1:00 every Saturday.
Yeah, so showing the double feature.
Yeah.
And got to see the original Godzilla, or the Godzilla King of the Monsters is what I got to see. Yeah. And so for I mean, like Ruben and myself as well, even through the 80s, it was those Saturday shows.
Yeah.
What books I found was Mark bringing me home a Marvel Godzilla comic book that he found by happenstance, until I walked into a grocery store in Bluntville, Tennessee in 94 and picked up my first G-Fan magazine.
Yep.
Just happened, and we're talking like Hillbilly Town, Tennessee, middle of nowhere. I was surprised it was there. And it was the issue, I don't remember the issue number, but it was the issue that was discussing Godzilla, Space Godzilla. It hadn't come out yet. And that was my first literature experience, and of course that opened a wide door for me as well. So I'm so glad that JD had done that magazine.
Right. And it's like there were a lot of fanzines that came before that, that most people have forgotten, sadly, that had limited life because they were basically being produced by fans for fans, and you did it on your own dime, and you charged like $1 per issue or something like that, and you sent them out to people. And I mean, there were a bunch of fanzines in the 70s. There was this kind of little explosion. There was like Japanese Giants fan letter, two different zines. The guy, I guess one of the guys just couldn't come up with a more original name. So there was the Japanese Giants fan letter. There was Japanese Giants. There was Godzilla Mania. I think done by a guy named Richard Campbell. Mark Rainey, who became a huge author of Dark Shadows novels.
Oh, cool.
He did a fanzine called Japanese Giants. He started it, and then he kind of dropped it because he started following more teenage pursuits, and then I think Ed Gottlieb picked it up from him. Said, "Hey, can I continue your zine?" And then that guy ran with it. So there were all kinds of zines out there back in the day, but G-Fan came at a weird time because there was a vacuum, and I have to give the man credit for keeping that thing running this long, man.
Oh yeah, for many years. So, well, man,
I mean, the '90s was not. It was. I mean, Godzilla '83. 85 came out. '84, whichever I want to say.
Right.
Came out, and then there was, for me, down in South Texas, there was no fanzines. It was hit and miss down here. Yeah. You know, just to give you an example, like my cousin moved from California to Texas, and he was wearing these strange shoes. And we're like, "What's that? What are you wearing?" He goes, "You don't know what Vans are?" Like, we don't have those here. And he goes, "Oh, they're all over California." And then a year later, guess what? Everybody was wearing Vans. It just took a year or so to get down here.
Right.
So
it depends on how the pop culture would circulate. There'd be
exactly
something would become popular on either coast and then slowly spread across the country.
Yeah.
It's just one of those things. And it's the same way with magazines. With me, it was more about music.
Right.
Like my son asked me, "How'd you hear about Metallica?" I said, "I picked up a magazine and they were in new artist section."
Right.
New band called Metallica, and then they hit it big. And that's the only way I heard about them.
Right. And then you go from there and you go like, I'm going to go down to the record store and check these guys out.
Exactly. Yeah.
You had to do blind buys, man. You had to go just buy the album and go, I hope this doesn't suck.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. We used to buy the albums according to the album covers.
Yes.
That's a great looking album cover,
Yeah.
man. I got to buy that. I hope this is a good album.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's how it was. That's how it was with Godzilla. That's how it was with anything pop culture back then. Right. As far as I go down here in South Texas, it was
right.
It was
and
really tough.
The same story across the country with kids watching monster movies, where you saw something coming up in the TV guide, you watched your local horror host that was on every week. You didn't care what movie it was. You didn't go, well, I'm not really interested in Phantom of the Opera, so I'm not going to watch Sammy Terry tonight.
Yeah.
You would go, I'm going to watch Sammy Terry every week. And you got exposed to, a new movie that you normally wouldn't have maybe gone out of your way to see, And so, I think no matter what part of the United States you're raised in, that was kind of a similar experience, shared experience with people across the country during that time period, from when horror hosts started in the late 50s, all the way up till when they kind of started disappearing in the 80s. And then you see the second generation of people that, we're watching TNT's Monster Vision. Yeah. And that kind of kickstarted another thing. And some people even told me, man, that, they had kind of like forgotten about Godzilla films or Japanese monster movies, and they started watching Monster Vision, and they went, oh, I got back into it. And that kind of wave were the first people to find that, started trying to find stuff. And, what else is out there? Or I want to, maybe can I go buy something from, one of these movies? Yeah. Maybe there's a figure or a poster or something like that. And then they stumbled across the new wave of Godzilla movies in the 90s that way. Yep. And that all kind of congealed with, what was happening with sort of an emerging fandom at that point,
Yeah.
Around G-Fan and G-Fest and the convention and then the internet, for better
the internet
or worse.
was a big deal.
Internet was huge.
Yeah, that's when that was such a, it was such a just a plethora of information came out all of a sudden. All of a sudden, you can go to a web, I used to always go to Barry's Temple.
Barry's Temple, yeah.
Wow. Oh yeah, Barry's Temple.
I haven't heard that name in a while.
There at the very beginning, yeah, and then through him, I started. It was all this information. I'm like, ooh, now he points you in all these directions, and that's all I had back then. That
Right.
was pretty early on in the internet, when you had to use AOL to get on. That's all.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So,
And so it was just, once the internet hit, then all of a sudden it was awesome.
Right.
And also the fan base grew from there too,
Right.
I think,
And
because
yeah,
it
and
was- it was
another
like
thing happened at that time period, which was, you had stuff that was on TV. There were very few movies you could go out to a store and buy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like, maybe, you'd go to a Sam Goodies or whatever your local video store was that sold videos, or you go to your local video rental place. But there, you couldn't find everything. Things went in and out of print. There were some movies that had not been released at all yet.
Yes.
Even older movies that, we saw when we were younger on TV. And it was kind of hard to locate stuff. So
Yeah.
films like tonight's topic, Destroy All Monsters, fell
That
through
was
the
a bummer.
cracks in that period of time.
I didn't get to see that movie, and we talked about it the last time when we reviewed this movie. I didn't see that till it came out on VHS and it showed up at the video store for rental.
Right. That was
Before
like the early
then,
'90s.
it didn't make it to our theaters down here. It didn't
Really?
It wasn't on regular rotation. No, it didn't.
Yeah.
That just didn't make it down here. And it wasn't on regular rotation on TV. So it was
Right.
one of those movies that was like a legend. You know,
Right.
sometimes I just didn't know of it. Then I went over to the video store and there it was.
it was Monster
yeah.
Vision for me. TNT's
Yeah.
Monster Vision is
Yeah.
where I finally got to see
That was the
Destroy
first
All
time you saw it?
Monsters.
Yeah.
And then went from Monster Vision, which I absolutely love, Destroy All Monsters, and we'll go ahead and segue into it. To my second viewing of it was when Sci-Fi Channel started picking up the Godzilla
yeah.
movies. And I remember watching it on Sci-Fi Channel going, what just happened? This is not the same movie I just watched on Monster Vision, because at the time I was unaware of the different dubs, where Monster Vision had the AIP dub, and then Sci-Fi Channel's was slightly different, and I guess that's what the one ends up being
Right.
at ADV Films had used. But either way, it was still just like, oh, this is awesome. So for me as a kid, Destroy All Monsters came out in '68 in August 1st. Which a little, for those who seen the episode or listened to the episode prior, the movie came out in 1968. Originally was the plan to end this series with Destroy All Monsters. And so
Yeah, that's correct.
Honda
Yeah.
and Tanaka wanted to kind of go out with a bang. And that's why they brought in all the monsters, just cram packed with it. It was, if I'm not mistaken, the highest budget of Godzilla films at the time. It had like a 200 million yen budget, and unfortunately did less than that, did like 170 million in the box office. But that was the goal, was to make it just a big shebang. And boy, was it, seeing it as a kid, in the early 90s, I just loved it. It was just so awesome to see, especially, seeing Godzilla, Amanda, Rodan, and Mothra all attacking Tokyo at once. I'm like, I'd not seen anything like that. It was just absolutely epic. So for me, prior to Destroy All Monsters, had seen the original Godzilla King of the Monsters with Steve Martin, and then at that point had really kind of gone through. I'd seen everything prior to it, and had honestly seen a few after. So I'd seen everything up to Destroy All Monsters, just hadn't seen it yet. Had seen Godzilla versus Gigan, Godzilla versus Smog Monster, Godzilla versus Meg Godzilla, Terror Meg Godzilla. But that was one of those ones, Ruben, like you're saying, that for some reason, even on TV, it had eluded me.
Yeah.
Until Monster Vision had dropped it one day, and I was like,
Right.
"What? This is
Well,
just."
I think
epic."
they like in Newcastle, Indiana, where I grew up, you have one movie theater, and I didn't see my first Godzilla movie till Smog Monster, and that was best I can recollect the very first Godzilla movie that came to the only theater that we had in town. And so everything I got and watched Destroy All Monsters was through television. And just like August, we would dissect a TV guide. We would tear it apart, going through, checking the movies out, checking all the movies out, see what monster movies were coming on, and especially like when Destroy All Monster came on, I actually, the first time I saw it, did not know it. And I was like, wait, what's this? Who's this monster? What's this? And I was just like ecstatic, man. I couldn't leave the television because I was like, Godzilla's in this. I'm in this movie right now.
Yeah, and then
you know,
all these
and
other
just,
monsters.
oh yeah, and just thought, oh, this is great, this is fantastic, and was just glued to the TV. And then you go, and just like you go to school and you got to talk about it at school. It's like, dude, did you see that movie that was on? It was great.
Oh yeah,
So,
I was blessed at the time around
Yeah.
around the time of seeing it because I had a Japanese friend at school
Yeah.
whose father worked in Japan, but worked in a company and had a factory near the town we lived in, and so they lived here, and so there was no Godzilla fans at my school other than Yohei, and so we just bonded. And he had no friends because he's a Japanese student and didn't really speak much English, and so we bonded big time. And I was over all the time. We'd play with our Godzilla figures.
oh
And
yeah,
his
oh yeah, I
dad would
remember
bring
that.
us back Godzilla toys from Japan and crazy snacks and stuff. And I lucked out. I mean, definitely big time. August, what about you, man? What because when we discussed, hey, let's what we want to talk about for the show, you were pretty excited about Destroy Monsters. This is one of your favorites, correct?
Oh yeah. There's a. When people ask, what's the Godzilla movie that you watch the most, and that is changed throughout my life with Godzilla, because I never dropped watching this stuff. I continually watched this stuff my entire life. It depends on what period of time. That there's one point where my favorite Godzilla movie was the '64 Godzilla versus the Thing, or Mothra versus Godzilla, and that was like the big favorite for a long time. My personal relationship now is with Godzilla is like Destroy All Monsters. And that's the one that gets the most play. It's like a comfort movie.
Mhm.
And it's one of the films that I will watch because there's a lot of people who go like, I only watch the subtitled versions in Japanese.
Sounds like me.
And it's like I used to promote heavily back in the day to people who talked ill of these movies because some of them were dubbed a little dumb or poorly, and some of them were re-edited a little bit, and then you're watching them on TV, and all you have is pan and scan, where they cut the sides off the picture. You're not seeing the full, widescreen image. And so I heavily promoted, like, you need to see the Japanese versions with the actual actors speaking their lines, into a live microphone on set, or they're doing their own looping, but as any movie would be produced in the States. Because I think it was on a radio show to promote our local TV station that Bob Wilkins was on, was KTVU2 in Oakland, across the bay from us, and our largest independent. And they were going to do the premiere of the Bay Area, Northern California, premiere of Godzilla 1985. First time on television.
Oh, man.
And they sent me out to do some radio shows. And I did this morning radio show, which has, the typical comedian host that just bags on everything. And if he gets fringe guests on, like UFO people or stuff like that, that he will just like tear them apart until they're unable to continue to talk about their subject. And they break down, and then they just like walk out of the station. They thought that was a great gag. So they had me on, and the guys are going, oh, the cardboard buildings and all that kind of stuff. And I I didn't get mad, man. What I did was I just waited till he was done, and then I'd go, anyway, and I'd continue. And he did this thing. He goes, oh, man, all those movies, it's like they're so bad because, people are talking out of sync, and it's so funny, and they sound fun. I go, can I ask you a serious question? I go, do you like Akira Kurosawa? Oh, he's one of the great filmmakers of all time. I go, yeah, Seven Samurai, Yojimbo. I go, well, think of it this way. He produced those movies that everyone unanimously says are some of the greatest cinema in the world. Those are produced at the same studio as the Godzilla films, with many of the same actors that you think are fantastic in Kurosawa. You're making fun of them on Godzilla. Same actors. same film crews. I go, so let me ask you a question. What would you think? Could you take this seriously if you saw an edited version of Seven Samurai cut from 3.5 hours to about 90 minutes, and it was dubbed by 3 guys from the Bronx?
Yeah.
And he went, wow, I don't think I would take it very seriously. I go, exactly. And that's what you're seeing by seeing these chopped up, badly dubbed Godzilla movies. And, I also realized too that, that a lot of people were mostly seeing things like Megalon and Monster Island, Godzilla vs. Gigan, and
those were in heavy rotation. Those
those are the 70s movies, and they're not greatly dubbed, and you're seeing them, they're kind of all chopped up and whatnot. So people had like this opinion that all Godzilla films were like those at the time. So I said, just think about that. When he went, wow, and I said, you should see these movies on unedited and widescreen and in the original dialogue with English subtitles. And by the time I left the show, I actually was there till the show was over. He goes, man, I'm gonna have to find some of those uncut versions.
Yeah.
So you can change minds to people, but people have this prejudice, stuck in their head, and that's one of the prejudices that is kind of tainted Destroy All Monsters for a very long time. And why is that? Because of the infamous international dub, the so-called international dub, that Toho kind of pushed on the United States, starting in the 90s, after the AIP version fell out of print, fell out of distribution rather.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, like in the late 80s, Orion Pictures had picked up. I hate this story. Oh my God.
Then we
Because
must hear this.
it's what's the way that Hollywood works, man. So you have American International Pictures, which started in the 50s, and about 1979 they went, okay, we're done. That's a whole like 3-part show right there, just about AIP, the rise and fall of AIP. The point is, they were going like, okay, we're out. They started working with Filmways, which did a lot of TV show production, and they had done stuff like the Beverly Hillbillies was produced by Filmways, and Filmways said, okay, we'll take over this part of AIP, and Sam Arkoff, who ran AIP at that time, he was the head honcho. He was one of the founders.
Mm-hmm.
They divided up some of the titles, like his old partner James Nicholson. He had passed away by this time. His widow was sticking her hand out. Susan Hart, who was an actress, very little credit, stuck her hand out and he was like, okay, you take these films and we'll call it even, right? And he gave her, oh my God, poor Sam, why'd you do it? Sam gave her, I Was a Teenage Werewolf, It Conquered the World, I Was a Teenage Frankenstein, Invasion of the Saucermen, and a few other prime titles. And then he kept a few that he wanted, and then the rest all went to Filmways, and that included their Godzilla titles, of course. Some of the stuff that was co-produced with Henry Shapperstein, an American producer who ran United Productions of America, and he was involved with the making of Monster Zero, War of the Gargantuas, and so on. Yeah. He picked up some of the stuff that was owed back to him from AIP before they had their falling out about 66, 67. And then Filmways got those, and that included Smog Monster and Destroy All Monsters. And then Filmways was in trouble, and then they were bought by Orion Pictures. And then Orion Pictures decided to put out some of these old monster movies on VHS, and they were going to do 2 waves. And the first wave had like a lot of stuff that was, in circulation on television in the 70s. So they had, Monster from a Prehistoric Planet, which was GAPPA.
Mm-hmm.
They had Yongari, Monster from the Deep, Godzilla versus the Smog Monster, and so on, right? I think they had 4 titles. They were going to do an X from Outer Space. and Gilala. And then they were going to do a second wave, and that second wave was going to be Destroy All Monsters with the AIP dub because they owned it. And then they decided not to do it. I guess the wave that they released, they did VHS and Laserdisc, and they just went, the response was okay, but go through the trouble of putting out the other ones. So there was a missed opportunity for Destroy All Monsters coming out legitimately in the AIP version.
Oh man.
In the late 80s, early 90s, and it just kind of fell into the point where some of the rights reverted back. It'd be interesting to go through all the legalese to see what actually fell back and what Toho just decided, well, they stopped distributing this, so we're going to take it over. And then Orion Pictures in the 90s went under bad times, and then they were bought by MGM. So all the stuff that AIP produced that went to Filmways, and then Orion Pictures bought Filmways with their AIP catalog, and then Orion Pictures came along and bought that, and then they got into trouble, and then MGM bought all that. So there's a lot of stuff sitting at MGM, and then MGM doesn't want to do anything with that because they consider a lot of that stuff what they call Z grade. It's not worth going through and striking a new print. And an interesting side story. What is this Ragone guy gonna shut up?
Oh no,
You're doing good. Yeah.
No, I'm loving it. I'm loving it.
I used to do for a few years I did a classic horror film festival. And this is like pre-80s, mostly pre-80s movies. And so, we're talking about 50s up to the 70s, right? So I did this thing with some friends called Shock It to Me. It was in one of the biggest, oldest theaters in San Francisco, which we promoted as an actually haunted theater because a couple people died there. A projectionist had a heart attack, and a girl fell off the balcony.
Oh wow!
A little girl fell off the balcony, and the theater opened in the 20s. It's a beautiful theater, still open, still running, privately owned by the family that actually built it in the 20s. So they're holding on to this thing. It's awesome. And they show it's a revival theater now, so that means they're showing, old movies, right? A repertory theater.
Oh,
so anyway, I come to them with this harebrained scheme for Toho's 50th anniversary. And I was working with a few people, and we were going like, hey, let's try to look for some theaters, and what theaters can we do a Godzilla Film Festival in? And everybody kind of wrote off the Castro Theater, this theater I'm talking about, which has 1,404 seats.
Wow.
And about 650, the whole theater. And then the balcony, 650. Anyway, they do a lot of film festivals like the Film Noir Fest and, all these other annual film festivals. So we decided to not talk to them because everybody else working on this project was like, they'll never do this. They're too highbrow for Godzilla. They're just going to go away. So luckily, all the other places we're looking at, I didn't like, and I kind of made it I think we should go back. I had this gut feeling. I think we should go back to the Castro Theater, and went back, talked to them. They were like, we want this.
Wow.
So we came at them with we'll do a 3-day film festival, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Nobody's going to want to see more Godzilla movies than that. And the woman who was the programmer at the time, Anita Manga, who's one of the main people behind the Film Noir Society, the Film Noir Foundation, rather, and one of the people that does the Film Noir Festival, she was like, well, my friend is doing programming in New York, and they're doing a Godzilla festival, but they're doing it longer. And it's spread out over the whole month. So I need more days. 3 days is not enough.
Oh, wow.
And I went, are you kidding? And she goes, no, well, add some more days. And then it turned into a 7-day festival.
Wow.
Wow.
And I programmed 20 movies. And then we had to do, I think, a couple of they wanted a couple of non-kaiju movies too in there, just to break it up.
Yeah.
But anyway, so we do this big Godzilla festival. We brought some guests from Japan. That's a whole nother story. But because we did this thing, that I want to do a classic horror film festival. And so I went after we were done, and the theater was totally ecstatic. They had a new programmer come in running the events, and a guy named why am I forgetting his name, man? Am I getting that old? Bill Longan. So Bill Longan, I go to see Bill Longan, and I go, hey man, I did this. He was coming in at the tail end of the Godzilla Festival. It's when he started there. And then he goes, hey, you guys did really good. I go, I want to do this classic horror film festival. And we called it Shock It To Me. And that was after a local TV program in the 70s. And Shock Theater, which was also called, it was either Shock Theater and sometimes it was Shock It To Me Theater. But anyway, so we did this big horror film festival there. And we did that for a few years. And now I don't remember what the whole point of that.
Well, I know we were talking about the AIP and then the other dub for Destroy All Monsters at one point.
AIP horror films, and we didn't take any of the 50s stuff. I mean, even though working within that period of classic horror films, I wanted to do the really good films, not just to show something because this was made by AIP, like okay, let's just show, like, I don't know, Ghost of Drag Strip Hollow just because we can. I said, well, we should just do better films, and not putting it in. I love Ghost of Drag Strip Hollow. I watch it about once a year. I watch it every year. At least once a year I watch Ghost of Drag Strip Hollow because it's the template for Scooby-Doo.
Yeah.
So just think of that. It's Scooby-Doo.
I never seen that. I need to
watch
that.
Ghost of Drag Strip Hollow.
Yes.
Yeah, it's good.
And you'll see some parallels. But anyway, so, we were doing things like showing 3 Vincent Price movies in a row. I did call it 3 for the price of 1.
Nice. Good.
Corey Ackerman puns. And we did stuff like that. But when we did the Godzilla Festival and we got Destroy All Monsters for that, that had to come from Toho. So we couldn't get anything from AIP. And Toho was like, even though I know that the film elements are sitting in MGM for the AIP version, Toho wouldn't allow us to find it. And they didn't even have a print of War of the Gargantuas, which we screened and we got Russ Tamblyn to show up and host it.
Oh, that's cool.
And it was the first time Russ Tamblyn ever saw the movie.
Really?
Yeah, he had avoided it. He only did that movie to get a free trip to Japan. I mean, that's what he said to our entire audience. That's what he told me to my face too, is that he was in this period where he was anti-Hollywood. He was making his own experimental films. It was a free trip to Japan. He goes, I can work on one of my experimental films in between the setups in my free time. So when they were shooting something on a location and they didn't need him for a while, they had to break down and set up another shot, Russ Tamblyn would just wander away with his 16 millimeter camera or whatever he had. I can't remember if it was a Super 8 camera or if he had a 16, but whatever. The point is he walked off and he shot stuff for, his experimental movie, and so he had never seen the movie. He thought it was like going to be about the same quality as the Al Adamson movies.
Mm-hmm.
So he just kind of walked through that movie. He goes, I'm going to do this movie. I'm going to be a professional. I'm coming. I'm going to show up, be on time, know my lines, do my movie. And he did all that. But he was just going, it's a monster picture. It's a monster picture. How good could it be? So, in later years, after, his success with, Twin Peaks, and he's doing all these autograph shows like Chiller in New Jersey, people would come up and go, I loved you in War of the Gargantuas. And he's going like, okay, that's cool. But he had never seen it. So he had no reference. He didn't really want to talk. People go, what do you remember about making that movie? He goes, I don't remember anything. He kind of like brushed people off on it. So we had worked with him the prior year at our first Shock It To Me, because we did a double feature of Curse of the, all our films were 35 prints too. We didn't do any video, it was all 35. And we did a double feature of Curse of the Demon with The Haunting.
Oh, wow.
And we got Russ Tamblyn to come out for The Haunting. And then he said, you come out, we'll have you out for, before The Haunting, and you talk about your movie, what your experiences, blah, 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 blah. And he goes, what's the other movie, Curse of the Demon? He goes, oh, that stars, I worked with one of the actors in that movie, and she and I did a movie called Gun Crazy. He goes, so could I just host the whole night? I had to write notes, like Curse the Demon notes, to give to Russ Tamblyn. Because, he's like, I haven't seen that movie in years, even if I did see it. And so he did his homework. He watched the movie, he read the notes, and he came out and we did a whole funny gag, because IMDb had recently, at that time, this is 2004, the IMDb had this, there was a scare that they said Russ Tamblyn died on the IMDb. And so we did this whole joke. We did a seance on stage with a horror host called Mr. Lobo of Sinister Insomnia, who's nationally syndicated. He's still doing stuff. He's a great guy. And so we did this seance with the crystal ball on the table, and then we conjured Russ Tamblyn to appear. And then he goes, hey, we had him come from behind the screen. Out onto the stage. He goes, I'm not dead, And we asked him like the day that he came in, we go, hey, we want to do this gag. Are you into it? He goes, I want to do that. So he's a great guy to work with. And so we had him for that year. And so, when we asked him, hey, come out for War of the Gargantuas, he was like, cool. His only stipulation was he wanted a whole row of seats because he brought the whole Tamblyn clan. A lot of his family lives up here. So we had his daughters, his, other relatives, his wife, they all showed up. Right. And his daughter, Amber, who's an actress and a singer, she was there. China was there. They all came there. So the next year we at War of the Gargantuas, goes, same deal. He goes, same deal. Just, I just need a whole row of seats, right, for my family, right? Oh, cool, no problem. And we did that again. He came out. We offered to pay him to fly up because they live in LA, he and his wife. And then he was like, no, man, it's not that short. We get to see family while we're up here. So super cool guy.
That's cool.
We gave him a table. The theater had a mezzanine. And we had a whole bunch of vendors, and we gave him a table, of course, so he could sign stuff and meet and greet. And here was another class act on his part, and was the fact that there was some disaster. There was an earthquake in India. And so he said, here's my photos. And, you go to a lot of these shows, and these guys want $40 or $50 to sign a photo.
Yep.
That's usually a crappy photo. You have to buy their photo. And it's like, been duped 100 times. They lost the slide 100 years ago, and it's a copy of a copy of a copy, and it looks blurry, and they want $50, like $10 he was charging.
Wow. Something
like that. It wasn't expensive, because I would have went, I'm making a mental note of that, because I don't think that's right. But he had a sign that said, all proceeds are going to earthquake relief.
That's cool.
Wow.
He was like, I don't need this money. I'm going to donate all this to the Red Cross or whatever it was. So, and then he said, if any of the staff of the theater or any of your staff at the film festival want photos, they all get them for free.
That's so cool.
Very good.
Class
You don't
act.
see that.
Really
Class
cool.
act. So after he sat and watched the whole War of the Gargantuas, I was sitting across the road because I walked him up. I sat him. I had, I'm sitting there basically doing security, so nobody would bug him during the movie. So he never walked out of the movie. He was watching the movie. I didn't stare too much at him watching the movie. And afterwards I walked him up to the mezzanine, and the whole clan, and they were all chattering. Everybody's all excited about what they had just saw. And he turned to me and he said, you know what? That movie was actually good. He goes, I really enjoyed that. And he goes, and the technical effects wow, for the time that it was, oh my God, they were fantastic. Totally became a convert at that point. So now Russ Tamblyn actually likes War of the Gargantuas, but
Gotcha.
we had to get that print from a guy out back east. A guy who used to run Video Daikaiju.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, and
talked about them a few times on our show.
yeah, and he had a print of it, and so Toho went, well, you can get this private print because it's always iffy with these people.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can have a private print, and a lot of times you can get permission to show it, and then they show up with lawyers to confiscate that print.
Oh wow.
So Toho said, no, you can show it, but you got to pay us $500. And you can't pay the guy that's actually lending you the print. He cannot receive any compensation at all. But we want our $500, and you can only show it one time.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like Toho puts their weird, whammy voodoo on things, and with Destroy All Monsters, they kind of just don't want anyone to know that the AIP version exists anymore. They're suppressing a lot of these other prints that were dubbed by other people, and they don't want anybody to know about it.
And that's
acknowledge
another thing
that.
that's wonderful about the internet is and with the fan base for us as Godzilla fans is that there is a guy who's gone through and redone a lot of these AIP versions that Toho would release, like Destroy All Monsters, and he's taken the Blu-ray restorations and then taken the old AIP dubbing and he's synced it up and cleaned the audio up and that's a version that I've got on my Plex server. I've got my Blu-ray copy with the international dub, the Japanese version, but I've also got that AIP version he did. So the video is it's beautiful because we just can't get
it's still and that version is still the best because I've got the Blu-ray from Tokyo Shock and then I've got the Criterion. But both of them lack that AIP. Now, the Blu-ray picture is not as good as the Criterion. The Criterion is beautiful, but it's got the international dubbing. So, Red Menaces is still the best out there.
Oh, it is.
Oh yeah. They're doing Godzilla's work.
They definitely are. I mean,
they are.
Me being, I'm a massive, and everybody who's listening to the show knows this. I mean, 85 is my favorite and has been since I was a child.
Oh, nice.
And still is. I mean, I'm only missing now 2 pieces of licensed memorabilia here in America, from having everything that was done for that movie in 85. And just picked up the Laserdisc a couple weeks ago. Got the Betamax a month or 2 ago. Now to find the elusive CED, which is going to be near impossible.
Nice.
But but that's what I love about Red Menace has gone through. We never got a DVD. We never got anything post Laserdisc for that. And then he got a hold of a 35 millimeter print and redid it. And it's beautiful. Absolutely. Even included the Bambi versus meets Godzilla cartoon, which was just awesome. So I mean, hats off, because you got those fans that are so diehard, and to them it's not so much I want to make money because he doesn't make any money. It's what, Toho is not doing this for us, or because I know for the rights for the 85 have just gone asunder for years, going from Roger Corman over to Star Maker, to Anchor Bay, and just the mess that it's been through. He's just like, I'm doing it because we can't get it, so I'm gonna do it myself. And that's one of the things I like about our fan base is we love it that much that we're willing to do that type of work for this stuff.
Luckily we're we have the the ability
technology
to do that at home now. I mean, back in the 90s, there were guys that were putting the old AIP dubs onto the Japanese widescreen versions, like in their, out of their recording studio. And it was just VHS to VHS is what they were doing back then. So there were guys doing that. And, these guys didn't have, like sophisticated editing equipment. They had audio equipment going because they were in a sound studio. And there was a guy, Jay Johnson, who's I can't remember the name of his band, damn it. But anyway, Jay's always at G-Fest. Jay Johnson's a great guy, been around a long time. And he did that kind of thing, but he did it very low-fi
Mhm.
in terms of, sometimes it didn't match because, he didn't have, an Avid editing bay, and now you can have an Avid because it was, only rich people and movie
Right.
studios could afford that. Avid was developed by ILM and Lucasfilm, and I got to work on one because a friend of mine was going to school at the San Francisco Art Academy, or the Art Academy of San Francisco, it's called, and they had an Avid editing bay, and I needed a clip from Monster Zero. It's the scene where Nick Adams confronts Kumi Mizuno, and he does
Yep.
that whole thing. We got to get you out of that outfit,
Yeah.
got to get away
Oh,
from
yeah.
here, and it was the Japanese print, but the only available version you could get in English was the pan and scan tape from Paramount. So we were able to rip the audio from the Paramount version and then sync it up perfectly to the Japanese widescreen version. Just that sequence. We just took that one sequence, and it looked perfect. And people were going like, "Where did you get the widescreen English dub version from?" And we made it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and that's all I could afford to do. He goes, "I can only have this bay, the bay. I only have time in here booked for like an hour, so we got to do this quick." And it's only like a 2-minute scene or whatever it is, right? And now you could just do that at home, man. You got 14-year-old kids doing this stuff.
Yeah, I mean,
You
it
know, the-
takes
Yeah.
and it hats off because it takes a lot of time and
Oh, yeah.
and
Yeah.
effort. I mean, I did these guys, Mark and Ruben know they've seen it, and I've got friends that I've sent it to, and I did my own edited version of 85 where I removed all the American scenes, but I managed to keep
Right.
and make a whole new intro. And keep all of Raymond Burr's amazing dialogue in it, and then add some of the Japanese scenes back, but keep it edited the same way as the American cut for the intense,
Right.
the speed. And it took me 4 months. I'd never done anything like that before to edit it together and to get the audio
Right.
matched up.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it's a lot of work. So, I mean, the people
Oh,
that
yeah.
put the
Came
work
out
in.
great, but it did put a lot of work in.
Oh yeah, tons of work.
Yep.
Fix and redo it again now that I got a Blu-ray drive and putting it on 1080. But
Yeah, because even the Red Menace guy, he had to create a new opening, from scratch
yep,
Yeah.
with the English title cards, and then he had to do the end credits, and you have to go and try to find the exact fonts to match the original fonts they'd used in 69 on the AIP version. Emulate the opening as close as you can. You're doing animation with the AIP logo at the top, and you have to take a frame from still frame from that shot just before the credit comes up at the sunrise, or
yep.
maybe it's a sunset. I don't know. We don't know.
Yeah.
It could be a sunrise. It depends on your. As Obi-Wan says, it depends on your certain point of view.
That's right.
But you had to still that, but then he had to add grain on it to make it look like it's moving.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So it's not just like, the guy put a lot of effort, a lot of meticulous detail in it. And then that's the same thing with anything, when you got,
Yeah.
put out something like that and you're always going to muck with it. He did a 2.0 version of Destroy All Monsters. And I kind of prefer his first version of it, audio wise. I think his audio on the English dub in that version, in the first one he put out was better to my ear for some reason. I don't know.
No, I agree
But,
with you there because I've got both versions of it because I just got
Okay,
the 2.0, and there are occasional spots where the low end of the audio track drops out and it's kind of MIDI
Right.
and treble-ish on the 2.0
Right.
version.
Yeah, the first version's a lot better. But see, here we are deep in Destroy All Monsters now. We got back
Yeah.
and refocused,
Yeah.
reframed
Yeah.
to Destroy All Monsters. So where do we go from here with Destroy All Monsters, guys?
Man, for me, it was again, it was just the experience of Monster Vision on TNT.
Yeah.
TNT opened up a whole world for me. Not only that, I mean, when
You got kind of obsessed with it there for a while.
oh, hugely,
Oh, yeah.
hugely, because not only
Yeah.
for everybody's like, oh, the kids that I knew or anybody was like, oh, Monster Vision, I watched that. It wasn't just Monster Vision for me. A lot of people forgot that at 6:30 in the morning or whatever time it was in Tennessee, Ultra 7 came on TNT.
Oh, yeah.
And
Oh,
so,
yeah.
Right.
what kid is like, I'm getting up an hour earlier for school because I got to see some Ultra 7. So I mean, Monster Vision was amazing, and I just remember for me, like you said, Mark, just seeing all these monsters was just absolutely epic.
Oh, yeah.
And to me, it's one of the, and I stated on our previous episode about this, was one of the shining moments of the Showa era. For me, it was it was the last shining moment in the Showa era until Mechagodzilla. And it always holds staple. I mean, it's in a pretty regular routine for me. I say watch it at least 6-7 times a year, if not more.
Yeah.
Ruben, what about you, man?
All right. Well, mine is, as everybody who listens to the show knows, Monster Zero is my favorite of the Showa era.
That's a great one. That's a great one.
Yeah, that's
Very
always
good.
been my favorite. That's my go-to. But because I like Monster Zero so much, this one appeals to me quite a bit because the storyline was similar. You had more than one monster in it, so I loved that part of it, and so that's what attracted me to it. And it's funny, after we reviewed it the first time, I watched it again, and it's one of the ones that I will watch more than once a year,
Right.
and I bought this Criterion with all the movies, and I thought, perfect. I get to pop it in because usually these Godzilla movies get popped in fall and winter. That's my Godzilla season for the most part, and like every Christmas you get my son RJ. That's as soon as Christmas vacation started, that was okay. Let's watch Godzilla and Christmas Story. That's what we did, and that's one of the movies that we watch. And a lot of times, I like this one a lot because it's one that I was deprived of as a child. I didn't get to watch it for the first time till I was already a teenager. So, and looking at it that way, I'm like, well, I didn't get enough of it back when I was a kid. So now it get, Monster Zero, that was on a couple of times a year, easily, but this one was never. So, it's every time I watch it, it's grown on me a little bit more, even though it was in an era where Toho was cutting budgets and kind of just trying to throw out whatever they could out there. It's still a great movie that's a go-to, and it's great. Like if you want to introduce somebody now, everybody that listens to the show know this. I introduced my nephew and my son to Godzilla with Godzilla versus Megalon.
Okay.
Because I thought that was the film for a little kid, 5 years old, 4 years old. That would keep them interested, and it was great for kids.
Yeah.
But this one's another one that if you're a kid, and once you get them into, man, they'll be hooked for life. I think if you throw in Monster Zero, Destroy All Monsters, and Megalon is, like I said, that one was ready available because I think Megalon fell into public domain there. It seems like for a while. It seems like there's all kinds of stuff out
Everybody was releasing copies of
there.
it.
Yeah, everybody was releasing it. The one that I first got was the Good Times. I got it for my nephew.
Yeah, remember the Good Times.
And so I know it fell into public domain somehow. I don't know how, but it did.
Oh yeah.
So that was like the first one.
Right. Yeah. It's like, I think it was Godzilla versus the Cosmic Monster, aka Mechagodzilla, Godzilla on Monster Island, aka versus Gigan, and Megalon. All three of those movies fell into the public domain, because Cinema Shares Releasing, the company that distributed those three films in the United States, they didn't make the proper filings. So those movies kind of fell into public domain, and once a film falls into public domain, it doesn't
open
come out of it. It doesn't come out of it, and that's another of Toho's dirty little secrets they don't want anyone to know, is that those three films under those titles, with the particular edits those films have, stand as separate versions from the English dubbed uncut Toho versions. So that's why when you had those movies on the Sci-Fi Channel, there was an artist by the name of Bob Eggleton, well-known Godzilla artist, Bob
I have one of
Eggleton.
his. I have one of his shirts. Bought it
Right.
at a convention. Godzilla versus Cthulhu.
Gamera? Which one? Cthulhu. Yeah,
Cthulhu.
Yep.
yeah. That's a good one.
Cthulhu.
That's a good shirt.
My son has the Gamera one.
Yeah, see,
My
as
son's got the
as
Gamera one.
he should have that shirt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But Bob contacted the Sci-Fi Channel and said, you keep showing these really bad 16 millimeter prints of those movies. It's like, Toho has, you could probably get better prints directly from Toho. So Toho, I think Bob contacted a friend of his at Toho. Of course, I'm telling a story that somebody else should be telling, which is Bob. But the best that I remember of the story is that Bob basically said there's a better version out there. Tiptoe's LA office or somebody to it. Don't quote me hard on that. Yeah. And then they said basically to get those prints out of circulation, Toho said, we'll give you widescreen versions, beautiful widescreen versions, just so you take those prints off the air. and Sci-Fi Channel got those for free.
Oh, wow.
Because if they said, we want to charge you, Sci-Fi Channel say, no, we'll just stick with the same prints we already got that we can show free. 24 hours a day, 365. So, that's one of those bad things. Destroy All Monsters. Some people thought that it fell into public domain. It hasn't. Toho, one of Toho's main concerns with the dubbed versions that they don't control is that they're fearful of the actors, the voice actors, coming out of the woodwork and going, where are my residuals?
Yeah. Toho, where's my royalties for this?
Right.
Yeah.
If Toho shows or distributes those prints, they believe that someone's going to come after them. So their attorneys, or it's an American law firm, said, well, if you just ignore those versions, those problems go away. So
I got you.
That's why they supplanted it with that awful dub. So what Toho used to do back in the day is they'd do a movie, they would have it dubbed, and usually it was either dubbed in Japan by an expat American named William Ross, who also did some acting. And he had a company called Frontier Enterprises, a dubbing studio. And he did like TV shows, like entire TV shows, like multiple episodes, like 70, 80 episodes of a TV show. He was also doing movies. And then there was a group, I think it was Access International in Hong Kong, that also did dubbing. Unfortunately, they were the ones that we're used to from the 70s ones. So, it was like, Godzilla is on his way.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Godzilla
is coming.
Godzilla.
But still, straight away, And what was that line? It goes, we couldn't make the robots ourselves in Seatopia. Oh, yeah? Because you're too dumb.
Oh, yes.
So, but William Ross's company actually dubbed Destroy All Monsters. And some of the dialogue is like, wait, what? And, you listen to the Japanese version, or if you have a translation of the Japanese version, you're kind of like, how do they mess that up?
Yeah.
It's kind of confounding. But what Toho would do is, so a company like AIP would dub it. And what I used to think as a kid was, Toho would send like a master print, right, off of the negative, and in Japanese, and then the AIP would get somebody to translate it and dub it, right? So that's how I thought it worked. And what was really happening was Toho would dub these things for international export. So there'd be other countries in Asia or countries in the Middle East, other parts of the world, Latin America. They would get sent, unless otherwise requested, they would get sent these international English dubs. And so they would either, subtitle it in like Dutch or subtitle it in Spanish or whatever, Farsi, whatever language it needed to be. It was usually just subtitled, unless that the distributor preferred redubbing them. Mm-hmm. AIP got the dubbed version and went, holy cow, this is awful. What do we do with this? because AIP, and the reason why you can do detective work on this without having to go through paperwork is because when AIP picked up other Japanese films that they put straight to television, like Dogora the Space Monster, which was also produced by Toho, it's the Hong Kong dubbing. And it wasn't the Taitra Studios or the Taitra/Titan, because the company changed its name at one point.
Right.
They would dub those in New York. So you can tell which ones AIP just went, okay, we got this, just put this one on TV. We don't have to redub it. We're not going to put a lot of effort into this. So that's why you have like the Gammas that they released weren't necessarily, a couple of them were redubbed, but it would depend. If I'm not mistaken. Then Sandy Frank.
Yeah.
Then came Sandy Frank. But so, AIP got Destroy All Monsters and went, this is really bad. If we put this in theaters, people are going to walk out. We're already doing this is already a preposterous movie with giant monsters in it. We don't want everyone just to walk out because they're going, this sounds like a bad cartoon. So AIP had it redubbed. So this was pretty common because a lot of the dubbings that Toho did, they didn't really care. They just wanted them dubbed. They didn't really know if they were good quality or not. And I don't think anybody really cared. They just wanted something to be able to sell overseas.
Yeah. Right.
So AIP did this great job of dubbing of this film. It's very minimal editing. I think they edited out one comedic shot of Minila, aka Minya. Don't call me Godzuki. That's really it. That they didn't really alter the film too much. They, removed the opening credit theme, to the end of the picture, which I thought works. It works a lot better.
Yeah.
For me, because it just works better because that's the way I first saw it. And so speaking of the first time I saw it, this was one of those films, like Ruben said, was kind of elusive. It didn't get played on television. Now, it was in an AIP television package, and it didn't seem that any of our normal stations that ran monster movies picked up that package. And that was a very most requested film for like the Bob Wilkins show, Creature Features. And for some reason, somebody must have had that package already, and they were just sitting on it. I later found out it was our local CBS affiliate, KPIX5, and because they showed it one time at, this is like mid 70s, maybe it was about 75. They ran it once at like 2 a.m. because they were normally a sports station. They were primarily a local station that a lot of their programming was skewed towards sports. So movies were just sort of like something to show when a game got canceled, pretty much. So I stayed up to watch it. It was only when the TV Guide listed it as a 90-minute time slot. Now, this isn't the first time I saw the film, and I'm glad it wasn't, because what they did to it was unforgivable. So you looked at it back then, if you looked at the TV Guide and you saw a 90-minute time slot, they're going, oh, okay, so those movies are normally about 90 minutes long. And back then, commercial breaks for a 2-hour time slot would usually amount to maybe there was like about 10 to 12 minutes of commercials. Today, it's 30 minutes of commercials.
Yeah.
But back then, it was literally, you would be back in 2 minutes. Commercial breaks in the 70s were about 2 to 3 minutes at the most. So this is a late night time slot. They're going to probably put there's going to be bad commercials in it. Who cares? Whatever. But this was, I think, a 60-minute time slot.
Ooh.
And I went, what are they going to do with this thing? Instead of like some stations like Channel 2, KTVU, which did Creature Features, they had a team and they were the biggest independent. They were like really highly rated, popular station. They were our local movie channel because they got all the top tier stuff, And so they would have their film editors look at a movie and they go, okay, we got to cut this down by 10 minutes to make it fill this time slot. So they would watch the film and figure where they could make edits. These guys were pros, you know. These are guys that worked in the newsroom too, and so they would make the proper edits. And but some stations didn't really care about that kind of thing. So what happened with this 60-minute time slot is the movie starts with the AIP logo, and then the title comes up, Destroy All Monsters, and then they go to reel 2, which means they skip 12 minutes of the movie.
Oh.
So it went immediately from the opening credits to the SY-3 coming out of the crater on the moon.
What?
And I was and back then, because we didn't have VCRs yet, they didn't exist for home, you know, unless you were super rich, you might have some crazy video machine. But when the first VCRs that went out commercially were like over $1,000. So it was like, oh yeah, we don't need that. So we would audio record stuff. And if something was edited, if the movie was edited, I would immediately stop audio recording. Go, I have to have. One time I was so dumb as a kid. There was, The Mysterians is on, right? I'm going to audio record The Mysterians, the 1957 Toho sci-fi movie. So it was in black and white, so I stopped recording, doing an audio recording.
Because it was black and
white. I was just mad. I was just mad it wasn't a color print. So I just went, oh, screw this whole thing. I'm just not going to even watch this movie. So I could have just audio recorded it anyway, but you know, I'm not going to watch this abomination. They're showing a black and white print. So that was at one station that was sitting on Destroy All Monsters, and they did that to it, and we never saw it again. It was only shown the movie was released in 1969. AIP didn't bring it to television until 1972. And so from 72 on, Channel 5 bought this package. I mean, they showed some of the other movies in that package. There were a couple of Gamera movies. Those got on like on Sunday afternoons or something like that. But they sat on Destroy All Monsters.
Yeah.
Like instead of letting another station have it, another station would have ran it to hell. So there was a station in Sacramento. Bob Wilkins also had a show on Sacramento television on Saturday nights, and they had Destroy All Monsters, but we did not have cable. Cable was a luxury in those days. It was like, there's Destroy All Monsters on Channel 40, and I can't see it. And then a friend of mine who lived right next door to me, a classmate from school, you know, was bragging that their family just got cable. Ooh. And this was around 74. And I went, they're showing Destroy All Monsters on Saturday at 2:00. Can I come over to your house and watch it? You know, so, but that wasn't the first time I saw it. Luckily, the first time I saw it, it was rare. So you would do things like, I will, you know, buy you guys all lunch if you let me watch cable so I could see Destroy All Monsters. Because there's no other way to see it right now.
Yeah. So
when it was in first release in 68, couldn't see that, you know. So it comes around, I was too little. But here it comes. It's 1970, it's 1972 now. And June 2nd, 1972.
Wow.
I saw Destroy All Monsters for the first time. And in a theater, which was amazing. It was the best way to have your introduction to this movie on a 150-foot motion picture screen with all the monsters looking gigantic and that Ifukube soundtrack blaring. And it was amazing. Now, there was a theater in my neighborhood. This was sort of like my, people don't think I'm too blasphemous. This is my monster church. My church of horror films was the Grand Theater. And it was a 500-seat, what they call it's not a showcase theater, but it's called, I think it's called a neighborhood theater. And that's like, you know, the most smallest number of seats you could have with still being a legit movie theater.
Mhm.
They only showed horror, sci-fi, and monster movies. That's all they did.
That's my
That's
Sounds
all
like
they-
great theater to me.
yeah.
That sounds great.
That's all they did when I was a kid. That's all they showed. And eventually they switched over to all kung fu movies. But I got a couple of really good years in there of just going to this theater, and the movies changed every week. And sometimes they were only open because there was a collective that did that were doing rehearsals for stage plays. So they sometimes only were open at this point in time. The Grand Theater was only open to the public for movies Friday through Sunday. And here was the best thing. Did I already mention this? 3 movies. It was a triple feature every week.
Oh no, you didn't mention that yet.
Yeah,
Yeah.
triple feature every week for 50 cents for kids.
Wow.
So
That's
my
awesome.
mom could get rid of me
For the whole day.
for the whole
Big
day. I mean,
sports,
literally,
yeah.
3 movies is like what? They're 90 minutes each. You're gone for 4.5 hours.
You had breaks in between the movies, so you're gone 6 hours.
You know, yeah.
Yeah.
You had your 15 minutes between movies or whatever the intermission time was. So I was gone for all day. And this particular day, I was really jacked up to see Destroy All Monsters because I had read about it, missed opportunities to see it, and then here we go. And the 2 co-features were Taste the Blood of Dracula from 1970, the Hammer film with Christopher Lee as Dracula, and the 1969 disappointing film with Cameron Mitchell, Nightmare in Wax.
No, I don't think I've even seen that one. No.
Okay, well, if you really do feel the need to see Nightmare in Wax, it's on Amazon Prime Video. You can watch if you have Amazon Prime Video, you can watch it for free, and then you can blame me later. So I saw Destroy All Monsters, sat through both of the other movies. Dracula, loved Dracula films, loved Hammer films growing up.
Hammer films in general, I love. Yeah.
And I sat through Nightmare in Wax, and then I go, well, I could leave now, but Destroy All Monsters is going to be showing in 10 minutes. So I sat and watched Destroy All Monsters again.
Wow, nice.
And then I remember somebody coming to pick me up, but I think that on the early part of the day, and I don't remember exactly how this happened. Now, there were 2 theaters on this block on the same side of the street. There was the Grand Theater, which was the chapel of horror and sci-fi and fantasy. And then there was the Crown Theater that mostly, if I remember correctly, I think that was the theater that showed like a lot of Disney movies. So the Love Bug and the Shaggy DA and that kind of stuff. That kind of stuff. But then across the street was the biggest theater in the neighborhood, which was the New Mission Theater, which had 2,000 seats. That was also built in the all these theaters were old. These theaters were all built in the 20s.
Wow.
So the same weekend that I'm going to see Destroy All Monsters, across the street at the New Mission Theater, which showed a lot of A pictures, they got all the big movies, but then they would get exploitation movies and go like, we'll show this double bill, maybe this will come and go in a week, and then we'll go back to showing like, Midnight Cowboy or whatever, big Hollywood picture. That was the theater that showed all the big Hollywood pictures, but they didn't shy away from horror or exploitation, not the really bad exploitation, but sort of the mid-tier exploitation. So they would pick up AIP movies. So the same weekend, and it's the New Mission Theater. The same weekend was showing Frogs.
Yes.
With Ray Milland in first run.
Yeah.
That was a first run movie. Frogs in its premiere, and the double feature, because back then all theaters were double features, if not more. Back in those days, you always got a double feature. There were very few movies that would play just one movie. It would have to be a big movie that was also long, so something like the Andromeda Strain when it opened. The Andromeda Strain played by itself. you didn't get another picture. You might get a cartoon or the movie or something like that, but it was just the movie, just the one feature. So the new mission, the new mission theater had frogs with the conqueror worm.
Conquer worm.
Otherwise, from 1968, otherwise known as Witchfinder General, with Vincent Price.
Excuse me.
So,
Wow.
so I popped across the street at some point that weekend, and just went, I'm going to go. And somebody let me in because I don't remember.
Yeah.
I think maybe I paid to see frogs and then I left because Conqueror Worm was like intense and there was no monsters in it. And it just seemed like endless scenes of people being tortured. I was too little to like enjoy that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I remember,
that's not what you were looking for.
Yeah. I remember being in the theater and I remember kind of like standing in the opera section. That's how big the auditorium was. And watching and looking at the Conqueror Worm, like going like, well, I don't normally walk out of movies, but I think I'm gonna go do something else.
I'm not gonna stick around for this.
And then I left. And just like this is in June, the beginning of June in '72, and just a couple of months before in March, Smog Monster had just been in first run.
Yeah.
Yep.
And nobody in my family. Nobody in my family wanted to take me to Smog Monster, so I missed it.
Oh,
wow!
That
one did make it. That one did make it down here. Smog Monster did make it.
Yeah, I made it
down to this theater.
Yeah.
That was
but that experience of seeing Destroy All Monsters in a theater with a big, huge, giant screen was something you can't replace by you see something on television. I have strong memories of movies I saw for the first time on television, but the impact of Destroy All Monsters was pretty crazy to, a kid, seeing, and I'd seen a couple movies, giant Japanese monster movies before, this experience, but Destroy All Monsters delivered everything a young boy would want to see.
Yeah.
I
mean, what was there? I can't remember. 15 monsters?
It was 11. Yeah.
11.
Right. 11. But besides that, it had spaceships. Yeah. It had, outer space
aliens.
Stuff. Yeah, they had aliens. They had the moon in there. I mean, it's funny that Destroy All Monsters came out in 1968, the same year that 2001 opened in theaters. And the thing is that the moon in Destroy All Monsters is kind of played as a character of its own because it's an exaggerated and after the moon landing in '69, an immediately antiquated version, which is ironic because Destroy All Monsters opened in America just a month before the moon landing, because I think it opened up in the States. Let's see, when was the date? Oh, it opened up August 6, 1969 was its first play date in the United States. But, that's a month after the moon landing.
Yeah.
And so people got to see what the moon really looked like. And then you get Destroy All Monsters, which the moon doesn't look much different than it did in Battle in Outer Space from Toho in 1959, which is lots of jagged peaks, lots of jagged rocks and a craggy surface when, we know right now from as much of the moon as we've been able to, that has been photographed, see that it's mostly a lot of dust and, it looks more like sand dunes than, jagged rocky peaks. But, before the moon landing, we had not, a lot of people might not know this or maybe can't wrap their heads around the fact that we never sent any cameras, like unmanned stuff up to the moon at that point.
But even then, the pictures we saw were on the, on the tube.
Yeah.
On the
and
tube,
they were, all the cameras that they had up on the moon were black and white cameras.
Yeah.
And, they weren't exactly HD. So,
yeah, exactly. So it's not like this movie, you still have, you still had it on the big screen.
Right.
And you still,
it
was exaggerated, but kids don't care about that.
Right.
I didn't.
Right. And, a lot of these pictures, when they were first released, the Godzilla films in Japan, they weren't directly aimed at children. children made up a large part of the audience at a certain point, but these were all released as general audience pictures in Japan. And not until you get into the 70s, well, actually, with Godzilla's Revenge in 1969, which is the first launch of the Toho Champion Festival, which was a kiddie matinee series, where all the 70s movies were produced and released for. So it's kind of weird. Some people go, God, the Godzilla movies they made in the 70s aren't that great. Did they really release these to general audiences? And I was like, no, they weren't. They were shown as part of a package, a 3 or 4 hour package with cartoons and shorts, and they were shown in kiddie matinee packages where an adult would be mortified to walk into sit in a theater where it's all kids, So those movies were conceived, engineered, written, and produced specifically for kids. Now that's Godzilla's Revenge through Terror of Mechagodzilla.
Right.
Now some people can take those apart and go, from an American perspective, well, God, those movies are actually kind of there's I'm getting sort of contrary vibes, for lack of a better term, that I can't seem to grasp right now. There's contrarian things in these movies that they're very, very violent. There's a lot of
the Mechagodzilla.
Right.
Especially
People are getting
blood showing for the first time in Gigan.
Yeah, and you've got Hedorah, the smog monster, which has got people melting on screen into skeletons.
People
love
that as a kid.
Right. And a lot of American fans will go, well, these were, obviously not kids' movies, but they're geared towards kids. But I'm going, no, these were kiddie matinee films. And they're going, but that would never be allowed in America. I go, yeah, Japan is a totally different culture. Ergo, there were certain other things that were permissible at that time that have since been kind of like, parents groups and the Japanese PTA complained about that stuff. And if you look at any of the Japanese superhero TV shows that were made at the same time as these movies were in theaters, the producers of these things were pushing the boundaries, because if they did crazy stuff and, the kids would talk, to the other classmates, oh my God, this guy totally melts, and then he turns into a skeleton. So all the kids I want to go see that. Same thing we were doing here. I mean, we'd sneak into, I didn't really sneak into any R-rated movies. They just took our money.
They never. I used to go as a kid. They didn't care.
Yeah, they just take your money, and then there's you go see movies about pimps and across 110th Street, and kung fu movies with boobies and blood and people getting shot. And nobody cared you were 12.
As long as they got that money.
They just took our money. So people, some American fans talking to them, they still can't. Some of them can't wrap their head around the fact that these movies were made entirely for children. The 70s film. And it's like, that was just what was allowed at that time, even though there were parents that went, meh. But Japanese films moved into a more violent direction in terms of showing on-screen gore. Around that time in the late 60s, especially late 60s and through the 70s, because television had become such a giant competitor. Because even when in 1966, when Ultra Q, the precursor to Ultraman, premiered, the box office for giant monster movies started going down, because children in Japan were saying, why pay to go see one of these movies in a theater when I can watch it free on TV every week? I can watch Ultra Q for free.
They needed that shock value. They needed
They go, I could spend my I can spend my money on gumballs or collector's cards or whatever, and not go to and buy a movie ticket. I can spend it on something else and just watch Ultraman or Ultra Q on TV. It's free. I don't have to pay for a movie ticket. and at the same time, Japanese audiences in general were dropping, theaters were closing during the 60s, all because of television. The same sort of thing that happened in the United States 10 years before, and which is why you got widescreen and Technicolor and all these other reasons to get people away from television, to go like, oh, you can't see this on a square black and white TV at your home. This is in widescreen and Technicolor and stereo sound.
They come up with the gags. Like, is it Castle? I get confused. Castle with the vibrating.
Yeah, William Castle with
the Tingler, vibrating seats.
Yeah, with the Tingler and
the Tingler. Yeah,
Percepto.
The Tingler. Yeah, exactly.
Percepto, Emergo, all those all those gimmicks that he came up with. But yeah, you did those things. So Destroy All Monsters has a little more violence than some of the previous Godzilla pictures, because somebody gets shot in the head.
Yeah,
and they show
falls out of the building,
a small little bullet hole. Yeah, which was surprising. Because we hadn't seen. I mean, the most you ever would see would be in a Gamera picture, but that was either purple or green blood.
Yeah,
because the monsters would get cut.
Yeah,
and all the monsters did not have. None of the monsters had red blood. None of them did.
Yeah,
and I think that was a pretty wise move on Daiei's part, or Noriaki Iwasa, the director's part, because you could do crazy gore, but then it's not red, so it's not.
Yeah, it's not red, so it's not blood.
Offensive.
Yeah, it's not blood. So
and they got away with that.
Yeah.
But Destroy All Monsters got so much great stuff in it. You've got everything a 10-year-old boy would ever want to see. Lots of monsters, super science. You got the SY3, which is it's presented almost as a character in itself.
Yeah.
It's a coolest spaceship you want to see. It was beautiful design. It's still a classic, I think, space vehicle. Considering all that's come after it, it's still like I'm obsessed. I not only am I obsessed with Destroy All Monsters, I am obsessed separately and individually with the Moonlight SY3. And I always have a model of the SY3 on my desk somewhere.
That's pretty awesome. That's cool.
It gets moved around, but it's right here.
I think
right here.
I actually had somebody that I'd reached out to, a friend of mine. I was like, hey, if you had a chance to ask August any question, what would you ask? And his thing was, what's August's favorite example of like Toho science? Like, he loves the Dimension Tide from Godzilla vs. Megaguirus. And so would it be safe to say like the SY3 is your favorite example of Toho science?
Well, what was his favorite thing?
Like, he loved the Dimension Tide from Godzilla X Megaguirus, the black hole creator.
The black hole machine?
Yes.
Well, let's see. There's, because you have kind of separate things. You have devices, or weapons.
Yeah.
Like
that's
like
a weapon. Yeah.
Like the oxygen destroyer.
Right.
And then you have mecha, or the vehicles. So I always liked the maser cannons. From Gargantuas.
Oh yes, love it.
That have been, thankfully, people got smart and brought them back at a couple different points, so we got to see it again in different iterations. I really like the A-Psycho Light Ray. I guess it's not a tank; it's a car from Monster Zero.
Yep.
Which was the first version. It's like they did that, and then somebody said, "Hey, we could kind of like make this other weapon if we could just build them up out of this vehicle." So it's kind of interesting internally. You could see it as sort of like we already built these things, even though they had to make new parts for it. They just didn't slap a coat of paint on it. They had to kind of like, they had to figure out, draw, and build new pieces for the elevator, the elevator arm, the elevator arm, the parabola disc. They had to build new stuff to this thing that pre-existed, but it's almost sort of like real world science, where you build something and then you build another version of it. You can build on top of it. You can do the next model, the next upgrade. So that was kind of neat. So those are kind of like favorites in a way, but they kind of all get, they all get edged out. For a long time, it was the Atragon.
Mhm.
or the Goten.
Gotengo.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's still a favorite. I bought that damn die cast that's like 14 inches long, and I've also got a garage kit of the Atragon that's a vinyl kit that is 2.5 feet long,
Whoa.
which I still haven't built in 20 years. Still in the box, and I'm going. If I put it together and I ruin it,
Yeah.
so you put it with all the other kits you bought and you never built. Boxes.
But it's just cool to have. It's just
I want to build that thing because when I've been obsessed with the Atragon for a long time since I saw it as a kid, and I saw in the early '80s these Japanese friends of mine who were putting magazines together and books and editing books on all this cool stuff. They did and the garage kits, came out of Japan, and they were deep into that, where Japanese fans were making their own versions of toys they never got, or models that they were never made and released in Japan. So they were doing things like that. So this one guy built like a 2 meter? It might have been a 2 meter. So 2 meters is what? That's 6-7 foot long Atragon. Yep.
Wow.
Right. And he built this 6 foot Atragon, and it's shown in this one magazine. And I would just stare at it all day going, one day I'll have that. One day I'll have something like that. So then I got this one, and I went, okay, I got it. I'm just going to leave it in the box and, put stuff on top of the box. It's like, get that thing out of the box and build it. But all that being said, it's the SY3, man. It is the SY3. As a kid, there was a fighter jet, the F-111, that was developed by the U.S. Navy, and it might have been Northrop. I don't have the notes on that in front of me, but it was one of the first swing wing planes that was going to be a military plane that could go supersonic. And I would stare at pictures of that all the time when I was a kid, when that was, first put into service. And I don't even remember. I can't look up. There's somebody out there who's going to I have all the information on that plane, and I thank you for knowing that, man. Bless you. But so please forgive my, but I just remember as a kid seeing pictures of that plane, being obsessed with it, and going. And then here comes the SY3, which was based on that plane, and Thunderbird 1. So the designer, all the guys that worked at Toho, all the guys that designed stuff and built the miniatures and did the special effects, those guys were obsessed with things. They were watching stuff like Jerry Anderson's Thunderbirds on TV in Japan, which was a huge hit. They bring it back like every 10 years in Japan, and it becomes a big hit again, and they keep making waves of toys. Japan has made more toys, books, and books with amazing photos, behind-the-scenes photos, on specifically Thunderbirds than the British ever have. than anyone in Europe. The Japanese are obsessed with Thunderbirds, and it comes back. It's transcended, generations since the 60s. And so Thunderbirds was very much in their consciousness when they designed the SY3. Mr. Mitsumi built or designed the SY3. And I think that's why it's kind of stuck in my mind, because as a little kid, the Thunderbirds were on TV here in San Francisco, and I was obsessed with rockets and spaceships too, as well as monsters and dinosaurs. And so in the space program, I was obsessed, our real world space program. And so the SY3 just like satisfied several different points of my imagination as a kid. So I was down in Los Angeles a couple of times in the last couple of years. I usually go down a couple times a year to hang out with friends. It's no big deal. I'm not going down there to do anything special, just to get out of town and see something different, right?
Right.
And there's a Japanese shop. They have a Little Tokyo, which is their Japantown, near downtown LA. It's right pretty much in downtown LA, rather. And there's a Japanese, I guess the best way to call it is like a Japanese otaku nerd shop that's called Anime Jungle, which is an actual shop in Osaka in Japan. And its two brothers started that business, and one of the brothers moved to the States and opened up the LA store, which is expanded into several stores that are all right next to each other. It's crazy. And they have a lot of cool stuff. Some of it is overpriced. And the only reason why I say that is because, you could probably find a lot of people go there, look at stuff, and then go find it online,
Gotcha.
a little cheaper. But every time I go there, they still have this same, it's about a 2 foot, because the SY3 is, the main part, but it's also got the booster. So there's the full ship with the booster. And then there's the physical SY3 itself. I guess you would call that, I don't know, the command module.
Yeah,
I guess we'll call
that'd
that.
be a good name. Yeah.
And they have a 2 foot. I think it's probably, I could be out of my mind and exaggerated in my my big eyes going on. The world melts away when I stare at it in the case. But they have a built model of the command section that it built and painted, ready to go home with you, with the price tag of $400.
Whew.
Every time I go down there, I just stare at it and go, I wish I could justify the money. I know I could find this in Japan if I looked really hard, and I could probably find it, for half the price that they're asking for, and I would definitely buy it at that price. And there was a garage kit that was released a few years ago that is the wings swing open and everything. It's they released, the company called Daimo has put it out, a garage kit company that's running, I believe it's in Kyoto. It's either, I believe it's Kyoto or Osaka. It's been a long day, folks. One of them, the first one that came out, came with a miniature Rodan. So you could do like, Rodan's getting near to the ship,
Yeah.
the Rodan chase, you could have that in
Yeah.
your suit. And then they released another version of it, because the first one sold out. A couple of years later, they put it out again, the new SY3, the same model, just in the new edition, that came with the Keelak saucer, and it came with an option part so you could turn it into the Burning Dragon, the Fire
that
Dragon.
would be awesome.
Yes.
Yeah,
So it was like a clear acrylic painted in flames that you could put over the saucer. And that was kind of cool. So you could display it either way. And I keep going like, I should have bought it when it first came out. I could have got it for a couple $100 when it first came out. But now in the aftermarket prices, no. Plus I'll have to paint the damn thing. And which means it'll be sitting in a box for 10 years.
10 years.
or longer, Just somebody else built it for me. There was I built who was it? What was the name of the company? I can't remember. It doesn't really matter right now. I'm wasting time here by going to these side stories. But there was a company, a U.S. company, put out some classic sci-fi vehicles, over in the 15 years ago, and they did the Ark from When Worlds Collide, big silver bullet spaceship, right? So I bought that, spent a lot of time building it, built the whole thing, had the silver paint ready, to paint it, and then I froze, and it's been sitting unpainted since I put it together in 2008.
And God, that's how I would be. Like I keep, for the last probably 2 years, I've been eyeing, especially the last several months since we did the movie on the episode, the Pegasus Hobbies kit for the Cathoga from the Relic movie. A few times. I mean, that's one of my favorite monster movies, period, and especially movie monsters. But I don't like, you got to assemble it, and I'll totally assemble it, but then you got to paint it. And I know when it comes to that, I'm screwed at that point. I'm like, it's just going to sit there unpainted, like all gray plastic. Like I need to find one put together, or somebody, I'm with you there, August, because they would sit there for years, just unpainted.
I've got a Universal Monster Frankenstein in a box, because I bought it. I thought, oh, this is cool. I need to have it. I bought it, still sitting in a box. So
is that an original in the square box?
Yeah, it's the
Aurora.
The Aurora. That's the one I've got.
Yeah. In the square box.
No, this one's in a rectangular box.
Okay, so that was like a Polar Lights reissue.
Okay, yeah, it was a reissue.
Right, but it's the original kit. That's the important part, because
Yeah.
they reissued those were the long boxes that came out in the early 60s from Aurora. They did those rectangular boxes, and they in 1969 they what a nerd I am. In 1969 they started switching to square boxes to reissue the kits with the glow in the dark parts. The infamous glow in the dark parts. So there were two generations of people that grew up with those monster kits, because the first ones came out in the 60s. Right. Early 60s, and then the 70s, the kits were re-released in 69, 70, and they had all of them out by 72, and there was probably like 10 kits, because you had Godzilla, Kong, Frankenstein, Wolfman, Dracula, and the Witch, Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Yeah.
No, then later they did Rodan. This is their first monster kits. Then in the mid 70s, they said, well, we could just keep putting out these same kits. The molds are getting old. Why don't we have different technology now, where the molding process, we can do more detail with a lot of these kits now than we could in the 60s. This is 1974, 75. We could do better kits now. So they launched another series of monster kits called, they had first done monster scenes, which got them in a lot of trouble. But monster scenes was basically like set pieces, like a torture chamber and a mad scientist lab. And then they did individual, and these were all snapped together kits when those became popular. No glue needed, because parents were concerned kids were sniffing glue, And so they said, we're going to make, and then it made model kits bad, even though model kits had nothing to do with the model makers, had nothing to do, or companies had nothing to do with the glue manufacturing necessarily. So, but they were getting dragged down in this social dilemma. And so a lot of companies said, let's just make kits that just snap together. So that's what started that. And then, so they did monster scenes, they did a torture chamber, and they had an Iron Maiden. They had all this stuff. They did individually, they did like Frankenstein. They did Vampirella from the Warren comics, that same publishers as Famous Monsters, and they did a Mad Scientist, and then they did the Victim, who was a girl in Daisy Dukes, and had the shirt tied at the midriff, and they got in trouble for that, because they're going like, you got kids playing with this and then putting the girl in a torture chamber, putting her in a cage, and then there was this kind of like very thin, which none of the guys who worked on this stuff even thought about. But there was like, somebody brought up issues of like sexual perversion and these things. And so the kids became notorious. They were banned. And so Marvel said, not Marvel, but Aurora said, let's not make any more kits. And then about 1975, 74, 75, it blew over. They said, let's do a new series of kits. We'll make them highly detailed. We'll just stick to the monster stuff. And they launched a series called Monsters from the Movies. And they did Creature from the Black Lagoon swimming. Yeah. It's awesome. It's an awesome kit. And there's been reissues of it. It's an amazing kit. I bought one, and then I had a pen pal in Japan at the time and told him, and he goes, oh, I want that. And you're a kid, you get an allowance. You don't have a lot of money. So, I hadn't built it yet. And I just sent it to him, and I never bought another one. And that kit is worth so much money now. But that's why you shouldn't build any of your model kits. Just let them sit and play.
That's right. There you go. Justification.
That was the strategy.
Sell them for thousands later. But then they wanted to do Godzilla. Japanese monsters were still popular, so they wanted to do some more monsters besides Godzilla. And back then, Toho was a very cooperative, nice company that didn't get mad at people. And so they go, oh yeah, right. That happened. There was a time. I used to call Toho when I was a teenager, their LA office, and ask stupid kid questions, and they were like really nice to me. They didn't like laugh and hang up. I had a friend call them a couple years ago because they wanted to do some DVDs of other Toho movies, not any of the monster sci-fi or fantasy stuff. And Toho basically laughed at them and hung up on them.
Oh, geez.
Someone at the LA office laughed at a businessman and hung up on it, inquiring about getting the rights for DVD. for a couple of films. Pretty bad.
Yeah.
So it's, but anyway, so Aurora gets the rights to do a couple of Toho monsters. So they do Rodan and they do King Ghidorah, and these apparently they apparently based the Ghidorah on the Destroy All Monsters poster, the American movie poster.
Mm-hmm.
That's why his wings don't look like the wings in the movies, and he's kind of like, his heads don't look exactly like they do in the movies. But if you look at the Destroy All Monsters AIP movie poster, which ties us all back to Destroy All Monsters, pulling it back
There we go.
to Destroy All Monsters, that's the design that they based Ghidorah
That's
on.
what they based it on.
And then they were supposed to do another Godzilla, and they decided to stick with the '62 Godzilla, and the line was canceled before they got Godzilla out. But they got all the way to the patterns, and somebody recently bootlegged it, and you could buy it. You could buy this Monsters from the Movie kit, and all those kits were snap-togethers, and they also had 1 or 2 moving parts. Like the Ghidorah is all you could move the jaws on Ghidorah. Rodan, you could move his one leg, because he had the other leg was pegged on top of a building, like he's landing and crushing a building. And I think his beak opened. I haven't looked at those things in a long time. But then Godzilla had an opening, closing jaw, and the hands opened and closed, like kind of like Kung Fu Grip on GI Joe, man. Classic '70s GI Joe Kung Fu Grip.
Yeah.
And the set piece for that was, I think, well, Rodan, he's landing on a building. It's like in the city, and Ghidorah was an air base. He's standing in an air base, and then Godzilla he's breaking down Tokyo Tower. So you could actually put pieces of the Tokyo Tower in his hands. So if you look online, you can find this Godzilla kit. They're charging. The guy who's doing it they're just doing this limited edition fly by night under the table kind of thing. But they're reputable because a lot of people have already bought these. They've been out there for at least a couple months now, but they're going for about $120 a pop. But if you want a really super rare collectible, especially something that was never released, that's the big thing. It never came out.
Yep.
But somebody held on to these original parts. So anyway, blah blah blah. So
you just said the magic words to me, because I like to drop money on my Godzilla figures.
Yeah.
I mean, right now with the pandemic, I have to watch my spending. So I went, man, I would buy that in a heartbeat. If we weren't in this situation we're currently in, where I can't do it right now. But I've seen the prototype, years ago. This guy had it and would show up at Chiller and brag that he had it, for years. And then got to the point where nobody cared anymore, because everybody's like, we've seen that for the last 10 years, buddy. Why don't you put it out? And then somebody did put it out. So it's out there.
I'll be hunting that.
I think they molded it in pink. And people might go, why did they mold it in pink? Well, it's kind of a tribute to the first Aurora Godzilla kit from 1964, which was put out in fuchsia.
Huh.
And you're kind of like, why didn't they just mold it in green, like they did? Like they did.
Done.
By the time they came back with the kits in the 70s, like '69, when they reissued Godzilla, it was in a metallic, kind of a metallic greenish blue aqua. Somebody out there is going, it wasn't, it was this color. Thank you. But I'm just making a point. I'm not doing that for accuracy. Send all your complaint mail to anything I said wrong too.
Sludge cast.
And then have them forward it to me. But so this new kit is pink. It's a kind of a tribute to the original '64 kit that was in fuchsia, which was an odd color. When I was a kid, I saw one of the fuchsia kits and I was like, why is it this color? Now you got to paint all of Godzilla like green. What are they trying to do? They got to deal with the paint companies or something? What's going on here? Bastards. So the Ghidorah kit was based on Destroy All Monsters, so we can veer back to Destroy All Monsters. Destroy All Monsters is also notable because, it's got the most amount of monsters on screen. It's got the monsters distributed throughout the movie. It's also got the best iteration of Anguirus or Anguirus that you've ever seen. That I personally, that's my favorite iteration of that monster. When they made the film, they had to work with less of a budget than they had on Son of Godzilla. Now, some people might go, huh? How did that happen? Well, they actually, part of the expense, why Son of Godzilla was more expensive to produce was they actually went outside of Japan to shoot some of the footage. They took the actors to Guam. So the scenes where they're running on the beach or any of the stuff that's not studio bound, because you can tell if you're a seasoned movie watcher, you can tell the sets that are indoor sets, outdoor sets that were built inside of a studio. You can tell. It doesn't make it bad. It's just so they can control the environment, people. It doesn't mean it's a cheap movie. Those sets are expensive to build, and studio time is expensive.
And they still look good.
Right. And so they had a sponsor with Pan American Airlines for Son of Godzilla, and they flew the principal actors to Guam, and they shot all the exterior scenes of the beaches, all the stuff on the island were shot in Guam. So that added to the budget of that film. So, but you could also say like, well, this movie is supposed to be set in the late 90s, the end of the 20th century, but it doesn't really look that futuristic. It kind of just looks like the 1960s.
Yeah.
But if you really think about it, your town, my town, between the years 1968 and 1999 didn't change significantly, really. A lot of the buildings were the same. There'd be small cosmetic differences happening. Maybe a couple new buildings show up that are newer looking. But they kind of did that when they built the miniature sets. I mean, because, they built some buildings that obviously didn't exist in Tokyo. They made up their own version of Tokyo in the miniature sets.
Mm-hmm.
But then you have very subtle, a lot of the changes they made were subtle because I think the logic within the constraints of working within the particular budget they had is the fact that, things wouldn't really change that much. People wouldn't be dressing crazy. It's sort of like if you look at the incongruent differences in like the Back to the Future movies. When they did 2015 and Back to the Future, there's some couple things that are spot on. But the way people dressed completely never happened.
Oh yeah,
right.
Yeah.
And if you really look at it, I mean, we haven't really progressed in changes of style, unless you're talking about couture or high fashion. But every day, what people wear every day, the everyday average American, right, doesn't dress much different than they did in the mid '90s to
true.
now.
I definitely don't.
There's certain styles that changed a little bit, but it just kind of got, and then you got kids now, like younger kids that are dressing like they're in the 80s, kind of, that lasted for 2 years. And now they kind of look like kids in the early 90s, with a flannel tied around their waist. So they look a little more grungy. Although if you ask them what music they're listening to, you'd go like, not in that outfit. Really?
No. You're doing this all wrong.
This is where I'm confused. But the costume, there was some subtle costume design in Destroy All Monsters, which is not just off the rack 1960s outfits. There are several scenes with these guys who are the secret police.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. And they're investigating the aliens, right? Trying to track them down. If you look closely at their suits, they look like they're wearing tailored 1960s suits. They basically took a standard 1960s small lapel suit.
Yeah.
Similar to what Nick Adams was wearing in Monster Zero.
Mm-hmm.
But what they did is there's no lapels. They did this subtle design where there was no collar, no lapels, and where the buttons go, there's a little overlap about halfway down, and then there's buttons there. So the jackets on suits are different. And it's suits that they didn't buy those off the rack because those suits never existed in reality. That was their costume department. The costume designer purposely did that. There are also some of the outfits that the main female character, Kyoko Minabe, wears that were just made up by the Toho costume department. They were never sold in stores.
Yeah.
Women didn't dress that way in 1968. They're not off the rack. The difference is that a lot of science fiction pictures during that time, if you were showing something futuristic, like you got people running around in silver jumpsuits, and nobody's ever going to wear those,
Right.
in the future, in the future of 1999, no one's going to wear that. No one's going to wear some goofy looking thing like they would on Lost in Space or, some Irwin Allen show.
Yeah.
Where they tried to show the future, and the future looked like, wow, that's a really, really bad Halloween costume. I've seen better cosplay from a 5-year-old.
Right.
But so they had this subtle, costume design, and then you have the things like the other things that didn't exist. Like sort of like the off-duty outfits that the SY3 crew wears, the outfit that Akira Kubo as Captain Yamabe wears, when he goes to the central headquarters command room, and he's got this red outfit on. It's a red coat, and he's got red pants. He's got a red cap. They just weren't pulling stuff off the rack. All these things were made specifically for the movies. That shows like some really nice design work that doesn't stick out. You don't notice it, and that's what makes it great, because nobody's going, oh, that's a kind of cool futuristic looking jacket he's wearing. You don't notice it. And that's what makes it more impactful. You're not noticing it that these costumes that they're wearing aren't real. Of course, then you go to the spacesuits, which are these like sort of yellow rubber, Debo. Yeah, they're like the Debo jumpsuits, but that's the one thing where they made that allowance, where they went, we kind of want to show the future. We don't want to use. They could have just used the same costumes that Glenn and that Nick Adams and Akira Takarada wore in Monster Zero. Those were pretty much standard spacesuits, except for the color that NASA was using. That during the early part of the space race, Mercury and Gemini missions, it fits in with that. It doesn't look like. Somebody recently asked me, they saw a still from Monster Zero with both of them in their spacesuits, a head to toe shot, and they went, wow, they couldn't even get them some decent boots. Those have laces. And then I went, that's exactly how the Mercury and Gemini astronauts were outfitted. And they were like, what? And I gave him a couple NASA photos of all the Gemini mission astronauts, all the Mercury astronauts, and he took it back. Because he went, I didn't know that. I go, yeah, you can wear lace-up boots in a space capsule in space. You're not going,
as long as you don't exit.
Yeah. And then you go into, the Apollo missions. Of course, they're going to be the guys that are going to walk around the moon. They're going to be wearing something more airtight, obviously. So it's just interesting when people look back at a time where, in hindsight, when this movie came out in 68, even into like 72, you could kind of compare. It wasn't so crazy looking to people who look back, because to them it's all retro now.
Mm-hmm.
So they're looking through a different set of eyes. They weren't obsessed with the early space program. Like kids like me and every kid in America was even though we ended the Apollo missions by 74, it was all done.
I think something like that.
Looking back, you have to explain to everybody why this looked like this or that looked like that. And another example is like, in Destroy All Monsters, they had monorails, and there were all these, and somebody could go like, well, Disneyland monorail, and they have this monorail. But there is a monorail in Tokyo that has been there for a very long time. And it goes from one of the train stations in Tokyo, Ueno, the Ueno neighborhood, Ueno ward. Tokyo's built up of 23 different wards or neighborhoods, and it goes from Ueno Station all the way to the airport. So so you had this. What they did, they took that idea and then expanded it to like this. There's going to be above rail, above rail trains, above street trains, running all through Tokyo. So that was like another futuristic touch. And if you were a Tokyoite, at the time when this movie came out in 1968, you would go like, wow, that's cool. It's a neat idea to have monorails everywhere. But to an American, you were no context of knowing what Japan or Tokyo is like at all. And especially in retrospect, you might find it to be sort of a humorous, maybe.
Yeah.
You might find it to be a little, funny. But there was an actual monorail in Tokyo.
It's just like movies like Logan's Run. Back when I watched that movie, I thought it was great. You look at it now, and you're like, well, that was kind of weird what they thought the future was going to be like.
Right, and they shot a lot of all the interiors of the Dome City, which the Dome City is an interior.
Yeah,
it's already an interior city. What am I talking about? But they shot all the scenes inside the city. Those were all shot at a mall in Dallas, Texas.
Yeah,
that was a brand new mall at the time, and it was considered a very futuristic looking mall.
Yeah. It's like a Conquest of the Planet of the Apes. They took that. Yeah, they did
the plaza in LA. The last time I was in LA, we were passing that near downtown LA, and we're passing that plaza. I can't remember the name of it. I want to say Daily Plaza, but that's Chicago. But I think someone out there will know.
Yeah.
Correct me. Please
let us know.
Take my wife while you're at it.
Yeah.
But I was in my friend's car.
Yeah. I remember when they shot that. I remember reading when they shot that. It was brand new. It hadn't even opened yet.
Right.
And they decided, hey, we're going to shoot this movie here.
Yeah, I think it was part of the university.
I can't remember.
Somebody can look. Somebody Google that.
That's what I'm going to do.
Google it. But when we were driving past that. We're sitting in the car. We were driving to somewhere else from Little Tokyo. We had just stopped for lunch and hanging out, and then decided to drive somewhere else. And we're passing that, and it's like midday or whatever. It's like 2 p.m. or whatever, which isn't exactly midday. That would be noon, but whatever. So it was midday for me. But we're driving by, and I pointed. I just went apes.
Yeah.
That was a long introduction to a very short, sad joke.
We built up to it very well. So, that's all.
But, but the structure of Destroy All Monsters is great. Now, it's basically a rewrite. It's basically a rewrite of Monster Zero in a lot of ways.
Exactly.
But it's kind of like set on a larger scale, obviously. And there are really interesting things in it. Honda wanted to elaborate on a few of the things that are in the movie. He really wanted to elaborate on the first thing was what he felt in the future, what was going to be important, because concern back at that time globally was the ecology and future resources, and the fact that people were very, very concerned all the way back to like the 50s. These were topical concerns that one day we would run out of food, which is a central theme in Son of Godzilla.
Mm-hmm.
It was also the whole reason why Leo G. Carroll was making giant animals in Tarantula in 1955, because then we'd have a food supply for future, because we're going to have overpopulation. Overpopulation was the other driving theme that would ruin the earth, and that was very prominent in the 60s and 70s. In dystopian science fiction was all about overpopulation, and with movies like Zero Population Growth with Oliver Reed, Soylent Green, with Charlton Heston. You had all these concerns. So these were all running. A lot of people look back at these movies like the Godzilla films, and they can watch them in a bubble, and they can take them in a bubble. But there was all these other things that were not necessarily influencing it, but were currents in, topical currents of the day that were important issues. Not necessarily, well, all the movies were talking about this, so we're going to take from these other movies. No, these were important topics of the time, period, above and beyond movies.
Yep.
So, Honda wanted to really get into more about the undersea farming, which is mentioned just in the opening of the movie, in the opening narration.
In Augusta War Island. Yep.
Right. So he wanted to get more into that. He also wanted to show that in the movie, there were things where Toho went, we don't have the budget for that. We're not going to give you the money to expand on that. Focus, dude. Focus on the monsters. But you can still put that in there. You can still put that in there. But it wasn't that harsh. But they had to scale some of the ideas Honda wanted to elaborate on. That he had to scale them down. And he told this to myself and Guy Tucker in Japan. Guy Tucker wrote about this. A writer, Guy Tucker, wrote about it in his book. But anyway, so Guy Tucker also elaborated more with Honda, did a lot of interviews with Honda, and asked him about each and every one of his films, because a lot of people would tend to interview Honda and ask primarily about the important pictures or the most loved movies, and then you start getting towards the end of the 60s, Destroy All Monsters. People just asked less questions about those movies, so there were less details in Japan published on those movies. And when you get into the 70s, there was like nothing. It's like none of the serious young guys that were writing about this stuff in the 70s and 80s in Japan, they were kind of embarrassed to ask about those pictures. So they were asking about, Godzilla and Mothra and the Mysterians and stuff like that. They were asking, lots of questions about the early films, and not so much when you get into. So it's been kind of frustrating that nobody really interviewed these people seriously about things like Destroy All Monsters. But Guy Tucker, who published a book called Age of the Gods in the mid '90s, which was all about Honda and the films he made. He did hours and hours. He was living over there, and he just was. I guess he was like, "Can I come over and hang out, ask you another 4 hours of questions about these movies?" And Guy Tucker had a lot of insight on his own, and I always great conversations I had with him. He lived in New York. I lived in San Francisco. We'd call each other on the phone, and next thing you know, it's like 4 hours later, and we were talking just about King Kong Escapes, for 4 hours. And he would be talking about subtext of characters and stuff like that, stuff that I was like, I want to know how they made this or how they filmed this shot. And then he was interested in, the writing and how the characters, how the director, motivated the characters, or what he added to the characters or the story or the plot or certain themes that ran through the movie. And he was finding things that I go, holy crap, so it opened up stuff to me as well on certain films. And Honda, anyway, getting back to that, Honda wanted to expand on undersea farming and even include that they were doing gene manipulation and breeding. There's a little thing about breeding marine life in the narration.
Yeah, there is.
Yeah, there is.
And one version.
Right. But Honda wanted to show these new forms of fish on screen. And Toe was like, nope. You can't, you're not going to be able to build a bunch of fish for this, So that didn't happen. And he wanted to go more into the space program. And the moon, the fact that the moon had been being colonized, and what was happening with these, like, these what do they say in the film? Daily flights
Daily
to the moon.
daily flights to the moon.
You know?
Yeah.
And he wanted to go into this whole, I mean, they worked on this stuff. They wrote notes. These guys, wrote notes and wrote the script. So there's like books of notes where, you just sit there and like we know now that, George Lucas, in terms of Star Wars, had written lots of notes, and then on backgrounds of characters that would get eventually, they didn't appear in the movie. Right.
Yeah.
So, but, you build this world. So Honda was doing world building. And with the world building he was doing for the moon missions, he had come up with this thing that, some people have asked me, or I've wondered, when I was a kid, I wondered, is that, okay, so the designation of this ship that is the focus in the film, the SY3, it's Moonlight SY3, right? So Moonlight, obviously, means it's a moon ship from the Earth to the moon. Duh.
Mm-hmm.
But what's SY? You can't find it. You can't really find it anywhere.
Yeah.
That designates. There's some things in the Toho films, they put this kind of thought into them, right? And but then these things did not go into the popular culture. So, you didn't have this appear in a book or a magazine, because it's really interesting that when they did these TV shows and movies, that there are things that they said, we just want to cut to the action. We've got this ship, we've got this weapon, we've got this device, whether it's a TV show or a Toho film or whatever it happens to be. The outside media would fill in those blanks. And the outside media or the peripheral media would be boys magazines.
Yeah.
So when there's boys magazines, they would go like, here's how this thing works. Like you get a boys magazine, and they would have a thing on the SY3, and it would be, let's say, the SY3 or whatever it happens to be. You have 2001, they did the same thing. They would do diagrams, cutaways. You had these Japanese artists slaving away on diagrams and do cutaways and tell you how the Discovery in 2001 works, and they had those things with the SY3, where here's the reactor, here's this, here's that, here's where the ground car is. They'd work on the whole internal structure and show you, okay, the ground car comes out of this part, and this is where, and they do the drawing. And sometimes different magazines would have different artists doing different drawings. So you could have different cutaways, that differed a little bit. There was very little concern for quality control in those days, because why? Because, these movies are going to come out, they're going to be gone. These magazines come out, they're going to be gone. And it's not going to really matter 10 years from now. No one's going to care about this thing.
Yeah.
So, you have things like SY, which is short for system.
Okay.
So, it's things like that go into these films that are interesting. And with Destroy All Monsters, there's a lot of layered things beyond just the action that takes place.
Yeah. Well, that certainly breaks it down a lot. That gives me a different perspective on the movie that I've never really thought of. Especially, of course, what when I was a kid, none of that mattered to me. I was going to the movies and I was going to see.
It was a monster movie.
All
That's
these
what we were
monsters
going.
battle it out.
Oh, yeah.
Battle it out, man. That's all I cared about.
Right.
Now that I'm adult, well, now I can sit there and dissect the movie a little bit more, and it's cool because now you're like, oh man, you understand what's going on a little bit more. You can delve into the story a little bit. And look at stuff like you're saying. How did they do the miniatures? How did they do this? How did they do that? With a better understanding, and that's pretty cool.
Right. There's interesting things that they did with the background on the stories, things that you don't matter that don't matter to kids really. But I was kind of fascinated by, they open up the film with United Nations Science Committee.
Yeah.
And it's this whole structure, and there is a science division of the United Nations. But the one in this movie isn't that one,
Yeah.
These guys, these guys are apparently, because of their insignias, It's like there's a United Nations working sort of at toe. And a lot of people might be scared of this. It's like you have that, one world government. And Honda was a pacifist. He was drafted into the war, didn't want to be there. It scarred him, and that's a whole nother story, but he was anti-war, he was anti-nuke. And because a lot of Japanese were, because after the bombs dropped on Hiroshima, when Honda was a POW in China, so when the American occupation started pulling all the POWs, Japanese POWs out of China, and they would take them back through Japan, they purposely drove them through Hiroshima.
Oh, wow.
You go like, don't think about picking up your guns again, boys, because we got more of these. But Honda immediately became, nobody could conceive of one bomb that could do that much damage.
Yeah.
I mean, you could say in a science fiction novel, there were always super weapons that go back before the atomic bomb, like bombs that could blow up whole planets or whole solar systems. You look at the Lensman series by E. Doc Smith, series of great science fiction novels, but they kind of became ridiculous after a while because they started blowing up bigger and bigger things. You get to the point where, this planet is threatened. Then you get to this whole solar system's threatened. This whole quadrant is threatened. This whole galaxy can be blown up. Then you get, this will blow up the whole universe. There was they just kept the bugaboo, became bigger and bigger with each story. But so nobody could really wrap their head around that something like that could be real, So Honda was very affected with that. Godzilla is not only, a lot of people consider the original Godzilla character to be as conceived by Honda. Just looking at the movie itself, people go, well, obviously Godzilla is a symbol for the bombs dropped on Hiroshima. And no, not really. I mean, you could do that. You could do that and you wouldn't be wrong necessarily. But the creator of that character and the way he wrote, he was a co-writer on the script and he was the author of the picture, being a director. Honda said that Godzilla is the embodiment of all war.
Yeah, and I would agree with that more than
right. And Godzilla is also a victim of the H-bomb, which came after World War II.
Yeah, and I think they especially Hideki Anno, I don't know if I pronounced his name right, and his crew with Shin Godzilla. I think they captured that victim side so well in Shin Godzilla, especially with the way he looked, because he looks in pain constantly. I mean, just I love that part of Godzilla.
Yeah, and a part of the original film is when people talk about Godzilla's scales, which they're not really scales. They don't look really like scales, but his body texture. Those were purposely designed from the get-go in concept that these were keloid scars.
Mm-hmm.
Those are scars you develop from radiation exposure.
Yep. Yeah.
So Godzilla is not only a result of the H-bomb tests, he's also a victim of the H-bomb tests. And the manifestation of nuclear weaponry is in Godzilla's breath. That's where that comes into play. That's the visual symbol of that. Mm-hmm. So Godzilla's not just the one thing. Like Godzilla is obviously just the A bomb. He's not. Godzilla is a victim of the H bomb, a totally different bomb, and then also the manifestation of nuclear weapons is his breath.
Mm-hmm.
So a victim of science.
Yeah, he's a victim of science, like Frankenstein. Frankenstein's
exactly.
Frankenstein's monster is also, he's trapped in a world he never made. But
it wasn't his choice.
Right.
It wasn't Godzilla's choice either.
Right. And then by the time we get to destroy all monsters, the culture had changed in Japan. The character had to change event over time, and even though he was becoming sort of heroic, he was still like the reluctant good guy. He's kind of an anti-hero. You can't really call him a superhero until you get in the 70s where he's a superhero. That's what he is in the 70s.
Yeah.
But, some people will cite, well, in Ghidorah, the three-headed monster, Godzilla becomes a good guy.
Yeah.
He doesn't become a good guy.
No.
He's protecting his turf. He's still a jerk.
Yeah.
He's still stepping on buildings. He doesn't recant.
Yeah.
He
and in Destroy All Monsters, the same thing. He's tearing through. Of course, he's controlled by the aliens.
Right.
But even
the reason why that they have Monsterland and they're sealing they have all these systems to seal the monsters in. It's because they know if they wander out, they're going to break stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
With evil and
exactly right.
Yeah. With evil intent or not. There's an episode of, I believe, Ultraman Gaia from 1998, which isn't available yet. We know a lot of Ultraman stuff is coming out on Blu-ray and streaming.
Yeah.
But Ultraman Gaia is one of my favorite shows. And the reason why I bring that up is because there's an episode that opens up with there's an incident. They always have to open up like any TV show with an incident where you have a couple of guys doing something. And then especially with a monster show or a science fiction show, then something weird happens and then you cut the credits, right? This is the opening of the show, right? The opening moment, the hook. Every good show has a dramatic hook, the first moments. It opens up 2 guys working overtime in a kaiju insurance office. Kaiju damage insurance office.
That's awesome.
So they actually made that a thing, which is really cool. But anyway, so in Destroy All Monsters, the other great concept, of course, is Monsterland itself. Just the high concept of we're going to round up these monsters. We don't have to tell you how we did it. We're not going to show you how you did it because back in the day, you didn't have to show everything to everyone, right?
Right.
Yeah.
You didn't have to see everything. Now audiences today want to see everything, even though
they catch everything.
Yeah.
Catch anything that's out of the timeline or anything that's not.
Right. But I mean, audiences today demand to see stuff that's not necessary dramatically, they say we captured them, we put them on this island, and here they are. We're going to show you how we jail them. We're going to show you how we keep them in, and that's what I really want to see. But that whole concept of Monsterland was really, pretty awesome for me, and still is.
I love it. To me, it was I look back at Jurassic Park, and I'm like, hey, they did that in Destroy All Monsters. I mean, it's like,
yeah.
I think there were rumors in Japan that that Michael Crichton, when he wrote Jurassic Park, this was a novel before it was a movie.
Yeah.
That he must have saw Destroy All Monsters on late night TV, and went, it's kind of a good idea,
I can make some money.
And it's also ironic that in the book, The Making of Jurassic Park, there's a I don't know if he wrote the whole forward. I saw it at the time the movie came out. I didn't buy the book, but I remember seeing this because there was a Godzilla thing in there, which is Steven Spielberg's quoted in the forward, I guess you could say, that Godzilla was always the most realistic of the giant dinosaur movies because it made it because he seemed the most real. It's something like that. Not an exact quote. You can Google that.
Yeah,
for the quote.
I know what he's getting at.
Right.
I know exactly.
But he cited that, which was. But Destroy All Monsters doesn't have God. Okay, that joke failed. So. That joke failed because I couldn't remember the actor's name until just this second. I say Destroy All Monsters isn't that great because it doesn't have Jeff Goldblum in it.
There we go.
There you go. Shirtless on a table.
But it's got a Kira Kubo in it. And I love him. And as a fan of this particular movie, when we did our Godzilla Fest in 2004, November, we did it in the 50th anniversary month at the Castro Theater here in San Francisco. We invited some guests from Japan, and I specifically wanted Kubo, and we got Kubo. Right. It was Kubo's first trip to the States. and his first meeting with American fans. And when we were all done with the event, we had them here for 6 days, I think, or 5 days. And at the end of it, we had a dinner the night before they flew back to Japan, because we had Akira Kubo, we had Hiroshi Koizumi, who was the star of Gigantus and Mothra, and he's one of the main cast members in a bunch of other films as well. And then we had Stomu Kitagawa, who played King Ghidorah in Mothra 3 and played Godzilla from Godzilla 2000 on to Final Wars. So we had those 4 Japanese guests. And then we had, Russ Tamblyn and another American who played the mayor of Newkirk City in the original Mothra, Ed Keane, who appeared in a whole bunch of Japanese movies in the 50s and 60s. And he's living in San Francisco. I met him in the 90s and kept in contact with him for years and years and years, and said, I want you to be a guest. You were in Mothra. We're going to have you come on stage. It was the first time he and Koizumi, Hiroshi Koizumi, knew each other and hadn't seen each other since 1966.
Oh, wow.
That's cool.
Yeah. And it was I could talk about those guys forever, but everything that happened during that week. But we had Akira Kubo. So we're doing the dinner after the night before they're going to leave. So we're throwing them the big farewell dinner before we put them on the plane the next day and send them home. And so I'm sitting I wanted to sit across from Kubo. And I'm telling him how much I appreciate him coming and how much his films mean to the fans, how much his characters mean. And then I really emphasized his character from Destroy All Monsters being such a badass. He was like a hero because, he played like a nerdy inventor, and he played like kind of like a college guy in a couple films. And, but the real dynamic action hero, the only one he got in the Godzilla films was Destroy All Monsters, where he plays an action guy, So I made him cry.
Oh.
He got really emotional. He did the and then he had to put his head down because he didn't want to see anybody see the tears in his eyes. And so
that's what I was when you were bringing that up, I say, what was their reaction? Were they surprised at the fandom and the state on the stateside?
Oh yeah, I mean, Kubo had never been over here. Koizumi had been many times, and Koizumi was a guest at a couple of the conventions in New York and Chicago. So he was used to the fans already. Koizumi was. Kitagawa had never been here before, and he was totally stoked. And he was the younger, obviously the younger of the guys. So he wanted to do things when we were done, and I would be up at I would be up getting these guys up at the hotel at like 8 in the morning, so to do breakfast, then do sightseeing. Then we'd go do autograph signings, and then we'd go back to the theater for the matinee and put them up in the mezzanine at their table. Then we'd take them to lunch, and then we would take them sightseeing, and then take them back to their hotel, then pick them up, and then take them back to the theater for the evening performances. So that's what my day was like every day. And then Kitagawa was like, okay, you put the old men to bed, let's go bar hopping.
Let's go. Yeah.
I fell asleep at a bar in Japantown, a Japanese bar. and he just stood. I woke up because he stood over me and made fun of me. having no stamina.
Oh man.
So it was pretty funny. And then he forced us because you guys know what Super Sentai is, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
The origin of the Power Rangers.
Yep.
Kitagawa was one of the main Rangers in a bunch of shows. And so he's been Godzilla. He's been Godzilla, he's been King Ghidorah. The only thing he hasn't done is Kamen Rider and Ultraman, like be in the suit, right? But he worked on a lot of Toei Tokusatsu TV shows in the 70s. That's was first jobs working with Sonny Chiba's Japan Action Club. But anyway, So like it would be like late at night, and he would make me and whoever, my other partner working on taking care of him all that week, where it was my friend Dave Chappell, and anybody else who was tagging along with us. Kitagawa during that festival where we're going to the bars, would force us late night to do Super Sentai poses. You have to do the roll call pose.
Yeah, oh, man.
So he was doing that. And then he did this game where we went bowling because he loves bowling. And we were bowling one night, and he goes, and he would, every time he hit a strike, which was a lot, he's a great bowler.
Okay.
Every time of course he's Godzilla. Of course he's going to be a great bowler.
Yeah.
Because Godzilla is powerful. So every time he got a strike, he would do a Super Sentai pose, and then we would have to say which one it was, which character it was.
Man,
that's a cool game.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun doing that. But I did get to let Kubo know that during that event that how much he meant to me, to fans, and how I, one of the lesser films, and I'm sure a lot of the Japanese fans who've interviewed him, favorite Toho science fiction or fantasy film you got to work on, and all of them always say Matango. And that's because it was an actor's picture. It gave them more to do. They were the stars of the movie. The monsters came at the end of the picture, so they weren't competing with Godzilla, for screen time. So they all pretty much say that. But I wanted to tell him that I appreciated his part in Destroy All Monsters, because I'm sure nobody in Japan tells him that shit at all. Nobody's ever told him your part in Destroy All Monsters is great. I really doubt that. So
that's awesome. That's my favorite character in the movie as well. Kubo's, his character's awesome in this.
Yeah,
he does a great job leading. So
right. So there's a lot of great things going on. The United Nations Science Committee, the United Nations, basically actually working. That's the kind of future that Honda was hoping for, where the nations would put down hostilities towards each other and work together for a better world for humanity. And that theme runs all the way back to like the Mysterians, and which there's a lot of elements, of the Mysterians that's also in Destroy All Monsters. Primarily the aliens are coming, and they're going to stay here, which was also emulated in Monster Zero. So, Monster Zero is also an elaboration on the Mysterians theme. And I think one of the early, the space race, the interest in the space race in the mid-'60s was at its all-time high before the moon landing. So when they made Monster Zero, there was a conscious effort. They jokingly said, this is the Mysterians plus Godzilla. Basically, that was their kind of underlying theme, that they were going to mix those two things together, like chocolate and peanut butter.
Yeah.
Two great tastes that go great together.
Well, they succeeded, I'd say.
Oh, definitely.
It was awesome. Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. Is he still there?
Oh yeah, I'm still there.
So I was like, wait, did we lose him?
It gets quiet there.
I know. So, man, that's awesome, dude. Like, 1st August. Again, thank you so much for jumping in on this. And this is one of the things too, because like my wife messaged me. She's like, "How's it going?" I'm like, "It's going really, really good." Because my studio's downstairs, and August probably knows this. The fans or people who listen to, so she sits upstairs quietly watching YouTube videos or whatever she does. And I was like, the stories are just awesome. Like to listen to August tell some of these, because it's so cool to hear the experiences, especially and not only that, but things you've done and the experiences that you've had. It's just like, man, I wish that was me. That would have been really cool, especially like I hopefully wouldn't be passed out drunk in little Japan and having.
I don't know if I'd be as composed as I don't know if I'd be as composed as you were in some of those situations. I'd be turn into a total fangirl.
Oh yeah, with Kubo, and that would be the one though. Like that's awesome what you talk to him about Destroy All Monsters, and that's of course what this movie means so much to you. But I mean, I would unfortunately be one of those dudes, because when it comes to his roles, I love him in this. but man, I love him in Attack of the Mushroom People. Like as Kenji, he is awesome. I love that role.
Yeah.
I think because I like that movie so much, because it's so much more different than just your standard Godzilla. 'Cause again, my favorite Toho film besides the original Godzilla movie is actually Half Human. I love that movie.
Yeah.
That was just a much more personal creature and just different than the giant monster stuff. So watching movies like Attack of the Mushroom People or the H-Man, I love the H-Man. I really dig into those movies because it's just something a little, not used to the normal formula of Toho. So Kubo was great in Attack of the Mushroom People.
Yeah. Kubo's just a great actor. He's really great guy. He he sort of was he took lead, even though Koizumi is older than him. When they were there, he kind of became like the boss.
Mm-hmm.
So he would say things like, okay, during the show we were doing, he would say, I think this would work better than this, or if you did this way, which is kind of unusual because a lot of Japanese, if you're doing something wrong or doing something that they think could be improved, they don't criticize you they don't put anyone on the spot because that's kind of considered rude, and you're putting, and then they just bitch to their friends afterwards about it. They're like, oh, those guys were a little unorganized. But Kubo said, can I get this or that, or can we get this or that X amount of time before? Because we worked everything out with schedules and all that. And he was like, when we go on stage, he goes, when we go on stage, are we going to have, you have prepared questions? And, sometimes, you have prepared questions, and then what you do, we do free form, which is obviously someone starts saying something that based on your question that you've asked, and that leads to something else that you didn't account for in your questions. So then you go, tell me more about that. Or was this like that? Or that, it leads to other things. And then you get back to your main questions. And that's pretty common pretty much common in interviewing people like celebrities or filmmakers and whatnot, or anybody for that matter. But Kubo was like, I'd like to see we'd give them the questions like an hour or half hour before they went on stage. And, those had to be translated into Japanese, right? So, so then Kubo was like, I would rather prefer if we had a meeting 2 hours before, and we'll just all of us sit down in person instead of just handing us the notes, and then like Kitagawa was like, well, he's a taskmaster, but no, that was really cool because we wanted to make them 100% happy. And we even, I think we actually collectively, the people who worked on the show, or specifically, the things, the way they worked out, the people that were taking care of the guests, myself, Dave Chappell, when we had it at the last night before we took those guys to dinner for their farewell dinner, they did a farewell speech on stage, which is kind of customary, in Japan. When you do some kind of a film festival or a screening, there's always this like farewell address and a message to the audience, where all of the actors are like, this is my first time in America, or, I had a great time. I'm totally blown away by how many fans there are. We didn't know that people liked our old movies anymore. We had no idea if people even remembered our movies overseas. This blows us away. And they were telling these kind of things as their last thing. And Kubo was like, this is my first time in San Francisco. It's also my first time in the United States. And there was a last minute thing that happened. This leads into a story. So hang on that moment right there. And then we were taking them to restaurants. We had already planned all this out, but there were restaurants we were going to take them to. We knew all their dietary, needs or whatever, likes, dislikes. And so for some reason, there was a thing ran over, right? Like some autograph thing. And we're not going to tell people, we got to take them to dinner now, go away. We just let them let all the people waiting for the autographs get their autographs, and then we'll cut it off, right? We don't want to turn anyone away who's paid for a ticket to see these guys. So we're running a little late. we panicked because by the time we could drive to the restaurant we're supposed to go to and have them eat without rushing them to eat and come back, we would be late for the next movie because they would be, some of them were on stage talking about the next movie. So on the same block, there was a hamburger joint where they charbroiled the hamburgers, not a fast food place, but they actually made real burgers, right? And it was like a 1950s diner style kind of place, that most of us think are cheesy. It's kind of like, that's kind of goofy. But we said, you know what? We could take them there. We'll sit them all down. I'll take all their orders because this is where you walk up to the counter and place your order.
Oh yeah.
I'll take those. We'll get them their hamburgers. We'll be out of here with plenty of time to the theaters like 500, 600 feet away. And we go, oh man, I hope they don't hate us because we're taking them to this little tiny burger joint. And they're going to go, oh, they took us as a real low class place. Because we were taking them to like nice places, Yeah. And we want them to give them the best experience. And anyway, so we get them in there, as soon as we sat everyone down, luckily it was at a downtime for the restaurant. So there were plenty of, we pushed all these tables together. We got them to sit down. I explained to the guy who ran the place what's going on. These are all a bunch of actors from Japan. They're doing the thing at the theater, blah, 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 blah. And as I get everyone seated, there's a TV in there and they're just playing whatever's on, whatever channel they're watching, right? And a Godzilla commercial came on TV.
Oh, that's cool.
And it was that Pepto-Bismol commercial with Godzilla, with footage from Godzilla versus the Thing, where he wrecks Nagoya Castle.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, the first thing you hear in that commercial, if you're not looking at the TV, is Godzilla's roar. And everyone at the table looked up like, what the hell? And then I went and I pointed at the TV and I go, Gojira! And it was from Koizumi's movie, the movie Koizumi was in. So that was that really set the atmosphere great at that point. That was like, how could that even happen in reality? What are the astronomical
what are the
chances
odds?
of the actor from this movie? It was made in 1964. There's a clip of it in a US commercial on TV right now, right where he's sitting. How could that ever happen? And so, they have the meal. We get back to the theater. We think everybody's fine. They were all amused because it was like a real 1950s diner kind of thing. They were kind of amused by it.
I bet they loved it.
Yeah, they didn't say too much. We take them to a nice, because taking people to nice Chinese food, not like takeout Chinese, but a nice Chinese restaurant in Japan, that's kind of a big thing. If you go to interview a celebrity and you want to spring a big dinner for them, you take them to a Chinese restaurant, a high-end Chinese restaurant where it's authentic Chinese food.
Yeah.
So, and that's so we took them to places and we took them to specific, like San Francisco famous places. Not super high end. We're not rich, but
right.
It's like we took them to really nice places. So anyway, when Kubo is saying his farewell, and he's saying, I saw the Golden Gate Bridge, and we did this, and we went to this park. And then he went, I had my first real American hamburger, and he started crying.
Oh wow.
That's what I was expecting. I was waiting for when you're telling the story. I said, I bet he's going to say that they love the hamburger.
And out of the whole group, Kubo was the hardest nut to crack. He was very stoic and very professional the whole time. Meanwhile, Kubo's making jokes and poking us. And Kitagawa's like, we're making sexual innuendos with Godzilla. He said something. Mr. Lobo, we had different horror hosts also do little skits and stuff for, before some of the movies. So we have Mr. Lobo from Cinema Insomnia, and he's up on stage. He did this thing. We had a bird cage he had two Barbie dolls dressed as the Peanuts. The girls from Mothra were in the cage. Yeah. The Eilenas or the Shobijin, the little beauties. So we had been joking with Kitagawa about American words or English words sounding funny in Japanese, or the way Japanese pronounce or phoneticize English words. And one night we were joking around, we got hung up on uh, we got hung up on peanuts.
Oh,
And I was telling him, he was like going, "Oh, peanuts," and I go, "Yeah, but peanuts and what certain words in English sound like other words." And so I said, it kind of sounds like penis. And someone made a joke about hot peanuts. They used to sell hot peanuts. And then I just said, I was aping Japanese phonetics, and I was going, hot peanuts, hot peanuts. I go, hado peanuts, hard. I kept saying hard before peanuts.
Peanuts.
And so Kitagawa started, we were drinking in his room, and he just, he's falling over himself. And so we had a couple, Mr. Lobo's on stage doing his bit before Mothra, and then we're going to have the actors come up and talk. So Kitagawa is sitting with all the rest of the actors, and I'm sitting behind them because I'm going to usher them on stage, make sure, everybody gets up on stage. And Mr. Lobo's doing his bit with the cage, and I lean over to Kitagawa across his seat. I'm behind him, and I go, "Hado peanuts." And he just started laughing. He's going, don't make me laugh in front of the older guys, because they're going to ask me what I'm laughing at, and I'm going to have to explain it to them. He was so embarrassed. We were putting each other on the spot like all weekend. So, that was pretty funny.
That's awesome.
Cool.
Good guys. Kubo was a great guy. And he, like I said, it's like he was the most, because he didn't know us, and it's his first time in America, So, but by the time we were done, he was just like, he had opened up so much to everybody, and that was a really great experience to to make him cry twice.
That's August's proud moment in life right there. Not once, but twice.
It was just a great experience to make them feel appreciated,
And they
because sometimes you put these people through shows, and they just bring them from the airport or their hotel and pluck them down in front of a table, sign autographs, and then they put them on the plane to go back home.
Yeah.
We wanted to make them feel, we wanted to make them feel honored at every step.
Yeah.
And
They should, because they were such a big part of our childhoods. I mean, all of us.
Exactly.
All of us,
Yeah.
Very
So-
impactful.
So that goes all the way back. And if he wasn't in Destroy All Monsters, I wouldn't have given a care. Kubo, you can just go sit out in the rain for all I care. Go eat some mushrooms, bro.
But you were
Go
in
eat some
Destroy
mushrooms.
Yeah, it worked for him
But-
once.
Just kidding, for anybody out there who thinks I'm being serious.
Yeah.
Well, August, man, dude, thank you so much. We gotta wrap this one up.
Yeah.
For this, I mean, this has been awesome, and again,
Yeah.
so
Thank you.
humbling for the fact that you took the time out of your day and your schedule to do this with us. And I mean, we cannot thank you enough, a million times
Yes,
over.
definitely.
Appreciate it, man. I really appreciate it. It's been fun. You guys are great. And,
You don't know how much we appreciate the fact that we have not heard Sludge mention the word Titanic.
Man,
all
one
night
episode.
long.
We almost went through one episode, Mark. One episode
Oh,
without
amazing.
bringing that up, man. God. The running joke on the show, August, is my three most hated films of all time is Titanic by James Cameron, Spider-Man 3 by Sam Raimi, and then the 98 Godzilla film. So those two movies always make their way into the show at some point
Yes,
somehow.
Well,
Yeah,
we have something in common, man. We have something in common. I don't like any of those movies.
Yeah, see,
So,
awesome.
Well,
I can
now
do
don't
it-
go there. Don't go there.
You
'cause
two
he-
are fired. August is hired.
Yeah.
And I
Don't we have to be paid? Don't we have to be paid to be fired?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a
that's
good
true.
point there.
I don't pay.
Ruben,
My
that's
bad.
good to bring that up right there.
I
Ruben.
can work in Titanic.
Yeah. There you
Terrifying
go.
Titanic terror.
Man, I recently rewatched that because my Mark had only seen RoboCop once in his whole life when it first came out, and he didn't like it. And I was so awestruck by this that I was like, dude,
He didn't like what?
RoboCop.
RoboCop.
Really?
So, okay.
Here you
All
go,
right,
Mark.
here we go.
Here you go, Mark.
Okay.
He couldn't get over the fact that he survived the
I
shot through
just
the
didn't
head.
think it was realistic enough for what he went
Oh,
through.
well.
And we watch a giant
Yeah.
monster at all times.
I don't think he would Okay, here we go.
Yeah, we
Here
won't,
we go.
we won't get
Here we
into
go.
it. Well, we can go. You can go back and check out that episode. But I was kind of blown away by it, and they
Yeah.
know how much I hate Titanic. But I wanted him to watch it again, so I said, "Look, if you will go back and watch it, I promise you, you will enjoy this movie in retrospect, especially with the societal message in the movie." And so I was like, "If you do it, I'll go back and watch Titanic." And it took me. That movie's what, 2.5 hours, or a little over 2 hours long. I don't know. It took
Is
me.
it in a 3-hour movie?
Yeah, it took me
Titanic,
8
yeah,
hours to
Jesus.
watch it. I would go like 30 minutes,
Jeez.
like, oh, this is horrible, and I would turn it off, and then I'd get a little bit more, and I'm like, oh no, it was torture. That movie's torture.
Yeah.
One of
It
the
was
worst
good.
movies.
My
It was
wife
good.
my wife begs to differ on that.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
I'm gonna be respectful to your wife.
That's all I can tell you.
Well, it's not a
You
not
know.
a movie for boys.
Yeah, it's not.
No,
no.
no,
Mostly.
not at
Mostly.
all. So.
You know, I can actually say I really can't hate Titanic because I never ever saw it.
Oh, there you go.
Lucky
Yeah.
man.
Didn't see
you.
it, but you know,
You can take Sludge's word on it.
you know the reason why I never saw it? Because when it came out, it was playing worldwide, right?
Mhm.
I was in Japan when it came out. I'm in Tokyo, and I'm going from like, electronic stores to different electronic stores, looking, hunting DVDs and stuff, right?
Yeah.
And I'm going every nice one I'm going to all the nice ones that have the nice escalator. It's not some old mom and pop shop. These are all the big shops, like Tower Records kind of places,
Yeah.
and I'm going from shop to shop. Every single damn shop I went to was playing the stupid Celine Dion song. In
Oh no.
every
That's
store,
torture.
every shop I went into, all I heard was her, and that was enough for me not to see the movie.
There you
Oh
go.
man, my night's been
There you
made.
go.
August Ragone doesn't
Yeah.
like the same movies I don't like.
The only thing Titanic should be Titanosaurus.
Yes.
There you go. Yeah.
Oh man, awesome! Again, August, man, thank you so much. We
Thanks
definitely
again, guys.
greatly appreciate it, and
was great.
just hope you're blessed from doing this with
Thank
us, and it means a ton.
Thank you very
and
much.
then for,
You as well.
You guys out there listening, check out August, man. I mean, of course, August is well known for a lot of things that he does. When the John Monster movie, I mean, you did a lot of the commentary stuff for the Criterion Collection. You've wrote a couple books. You worked with, or still work with, right? Famous Monsters in Filmland.
Famous Monsters is done now. They
Yeah.
decided
They're
to
done.
call it a day. But I just talked to
Yeah.
the guy who was running it the last 10 years, 10, 12 years, Phil Kim. I just talked to him last week, just catching up. He moved from California. He's a Northern California boy. And when he did Famous Monsters and took it over, he moved down to LA because it's the film business,
Right.
So you can make all the contacts instead of he and his family. He would stay in LA for a while, and his family lived up in Santa Rosa, which is about an hour north of San Francisco. Anyway, why am I going in all this detail? I'll give you his phone number and his social security number in a couple minutes if you stick around. No, but Phil Nez, now he moved to the South. So he is, I believe, in Tennessee.
Our neck
You know,
of the
just
woods.
excited.
Yes.
He decided to bail on California. So
So hey, we came to a good
Wow.
state. Tennessee is a great state. I love it here. I've been to 48 states in this country, and I'm born and raised from Florida. But Tennessee,
Mhm.
man, that's home. I mean, of all the states I've been to,
Right.
overall, just super nice people, great food, great atmosphere. I love it here. But
Right.
again, August, thank you so much, man.
thanks, man.
Guys,
Appreciate it.
Hopefully
Yeah.
y'all enjoyed this episode. So many great things that we were told and stories that I absolutely loved through this. I don't often go back. I go back and edit these episodes and make sure and clean things up and whatnot, and put the trailers in and yada yada.
Please edit everything I said, man.
This will probably be the first time I go back and actually re-listen to one of our episodes in full, like a listener, because it was awesome. I mean, I love these stories.
Yeah.
So thank you so much.
Yeah.
And
Thank
for
you,
those
man.
listening,
Very cool.
definitely check August out. Pick up a book or check out some of the things he's done. Super great guy. Humble enough to come join us Yahoos, which is awesome. And check us out again next week when you guys listen to this, because we will finally hit the movie that shall not be named, that we are finally naming, and that's the Sony TriStar Godzilla 98 film. That,
Oh God.
yeah, we finally have got to hit that. And we've got a good friend, Justin McLean, who's going to be joining us for this, because he somehow thinks 98 Godzilla is better than Shin Godzilla, and we're going to find out why.
Wow.
So,
yeah, that's gonna be a good one, man.
I'm stoked about it. And then, of course, join us at the end of the month for our special holiday episode for Christmas. We are doing Mike Doherty's Krampus. So super stoked to be doing that one.
Nice.
So, but again, guys,
Fun
thank
movie,
you all.
man.
Oh, I love it. I'm such
Thanks
a big
a lot, man.
Doherty fan. But again, August, thank you so much, guys. Thank you all for listening. This is Sludge
and Mark.
Got Ruben over here in Corpus Christi, Texas.
There you go.
And the man from San Francisco.
Thank you, folks. Be cool to each other and respect everybody.
Absolutely.
You got it.
Y'all have a good night.
We have a home.